Hello, it's me. I think that may be the only part of that song that I know. Well, so I did have the chat out at some point, but here we go. Now we're all set. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Tuesday. I think it's going to be a little bit of a shorter stream today. I've been getting more migraines again, so I'm limiting my screen time. This is out of necessity. Not like my Luddite heart is really complaining about that, but there we go. Welcome. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. The United States of America, that is. Welcome to whatever this is. An attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee, your illustrious host. That's the first time I've said that. But does it make it any less true? No? I don't know. Welcome to the people who are here with good intent, who are wanting to build community, see the humanity in one another. A blessing to you. Namaste. Drawing upon Hydra power. Third gender in many Desi cultures. Here we have robust discussion, good faith criticism, even. We call out bullshit and engage in important conversations with nuance. At least, I hope so. That's the attempt. We share resources, provide education, and we are not doormats here. I don't know why I said it that way, but also doesn't make it any less true. And we also do not let people get away with shit that they should not. So if you are here with ill intent, looking to dehumanize others, you will be received in that manner. You will be called out, and you will be banned. There you go. May you receive what you give here. Alright. That was a chaotic intro, but there you go. Today, we're going to be continuing from some things that we were talking about yesterday, with AI being a continuation of colonization, one of the many ways that colonization is continuing, how people are resisting. There is a video from the Conscious Lee that we started yesterday, and he is featuring Taylor Sanchez, who has been providing some great information as well as to what is happening in Oklahoma specifically. But, you know, this is not isolated to Oklahoma, obviously. This is happening all over the country, happening all over the world. So we will finish that video. Also, there is a video from Andrewism that I wanted to show on LandBack, the Indigenous liberation movement, because clearly this is a necessity with Indigenous liberation, obviously. That's what the title just said. An important and necessary part of sovereignty and reparations, decolonizing, and providing people with the human dignity that is so deserved, so that we all deserve, but especially to groups of people who have been colonized and who have received all of these colonizing types of violence. So we will watch that video. I have not seen it, but I'm very excited to. It's something that has been on my list for a while. And then we will get into the preface and introduction of Caliban and the Witch This is a book by Silvia Federici. This book has come up of late because of us reading Macbeth, talking about decolonizing, talking about patriarchy, and which kinds of people are often categorized as witches. It is a wonderful meeting of these worlds. And it was brought up by a few people, but specifically Zubador yesterday brought this up as we were talking about naming some of the witches in the scene that we were going over for Macbeth in literature story time. So we will read the intro and preface. And I have only read excerpts of Caliban the Witch, so because of the importance of this feminist, Marxist, decolonial text, I started reading it again, but this time all the way through, and I thought that I would share some of the things that I'd been reading already. And as I'm continuing to read it, I will probably highlight various excerpts from it as we are going through Macbeth. There also is a video from Mr. Bruff, that account, this creator, on an analysis of the witches. I've seen part of it. I haven't seen it all the way through, but it has some historical context that I think is important. And then after, we will get into Macbeth. Shall we? All right. So to start off, since I like to start off with a humorous video, this is a video from Gaydar. Ananiah is the host of this show, and it is incredibly entertaining and informative about queer history, so she does such an excellent job. And I thought that we would watch this episode. It is with Aaliyah's Interlude, an incredible artist. So I have not seen this, and I wanted to watch this in real time on the stream. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Ananiah. This is Gaydar. Let the people know your name and your pronouns.
Hey y'all, my name is Aaliyah's Interlude, and my pronouns are she, her.
Or ITGIRL.
Period.
Some might say.
Yeah.
Some.
No, everybody.
No, everybody. Yeah, you know what?
Right.
Hashtag Aaliyah's Interlude.
Yeah.
Hashtag today, tomorrow, and forever.
Yes.
What are Trixie and Katya's real names?
Oh my God. I'm
The
literally on a
Bryans.
show with Trixie.
On a show with Trixie? What show are they on together? I didn't know that. They both look so cute. This coat that Ananiah has on, also Aaliyah's Interlude, her makeup. Just...
It's like the most stereotypical white guy name you can think of.
Is it like Greg?
Honestly,
And-
close.
Very
it's Brian.
close. Really?
Yeah,
The
the
Wait,
Bryans.
it's not close.
It is kind of close. You were gonna get it.
Yeah, I
'Cause
was.
I know you're thinking. You were going Greg
Yeah.
to like Daniel to
Yes.
like
Chad.
Chad, and then you would have been right there at Brian. I'm with you, boo. Which queer artist won Best Rap Album at the 2025 Grammys?
Doechii. Duh.
Okay, give me an 8-bar cut of
Yep.
a Doechii song. Here we go.
Okay.
6, 7,
Okay, okay.
8.
Oh my God, no, like I'm blanking. I know
Okay,
like
finish
all
the
of
lyric.
Doechii songs.
I'm a black
Purple, stack, chips, smoker, high heels, get slung. I'm a real fly. You ain't coach, huh?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You ate that. What is the queer-owned hair dye company that Haley Williams co-owns called?
No.
I don't know that.
You do not. You're lying.
She does. She owns a hair dye company.
Haley
Co-owns.
Williams? Is
Yeah.
she queer?
Yeah, we're still figuring it out.
Right. Fox, Arctic Fox.
No, it's Good Die Young. You knew that.
Yeah. You know, that was gonna be my second answer.
Right.
Yeah.
You knew that. Arctic Fox? Is it that one? Is it like the really bright colors
Yes,
that you get at CVS?
No, there's T actually. No, they died through the big one.
Mary Kill. We have Harper from Wizards of Waverly Place. Wasn't that your Halloween costume?
Yes, that was my Wizards of Waverly Place.
Okay, fuck Mary Kill. We have Harper from Wizards of Waverly Place,
Okay.
Chelsea from That's So Raven, and Lily Trescott from Hannah Montana.
Wait, what the they have in common? Are they just all side characters?
Yeah, they're all side white girls.
Oh, yeah, I'm taking Harper down. Like, that's
Okay.
my creative camp
Mary,
goddess.
So Mary Harper?
Yeah,
Okay.
Mary. Wait, who's the second one?
We have Chelsea from That's a Raven and Lily from Hannah
Ooh,
Montana.
Chelsea, you dying. No shade. Lily? Come on.
Yeah,
like,
I would have
was
chosen
almost
that
gonna marry
too.
Lily.
You remember?
Chelsea's
what's her
very
name?
annoying.
Olive from
not
Ant
Olive.
Farm.
No, that's from Ant Farm.
Oh.
What's the actor's name from... Yeah, remember when she did Cyberbully and we were all gagged?
Yes. No,
we
she's
were
fine.
gagged.
Yeah,
she
I would
turned
fuck
it
her.
out. We were like, Emily can't be doing no drama.
Right.
No, but then she was out there about to
Giving
kill
it up.
herself on MySpace. I live.
Oh, God.
Name 3 similarities between anime characters and gay people.
Extras,
Yep.
for one.
Yeah, for sure.
For two, I would say super, like, the outfits are always on 10.
Yeah.
Number 3,
And this is something you might be wearing right now, or sporting, I should say.
you lying. What are you talking about?
We were looking for colorful hair.
colorful hair.
Yeah.
Yeah, gay
Yeah.
people do like colorful hair.
I really do think there's like an intrinsic, almost like religious connection between gay people and anime. I'm happy you're here to speak on
Wait,
that.
what's your favorite anime?
Mine?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's Naruto just because of nostalgia, but it's probably number 6. What about
I've
you?
never heard of number 6.
Girl! I keep trying to get
that?
people to watch it.
I haven't
Everyone watch
either.
number 6.
Okay, I'll watch
What's your
it.
favorite anime?
I haven't seen a whole lot of anime,
Puss. Puss.
but I have been watching intermittently some One Piece. I like that it's very anti-establishment.
I have all the information I needed.
Well,
Yuri Warriors to the front, please.
Hello.
How can you tell if someone is an it girl?
Oh, I feel like being an it girl is more about if, like, I could tell someone's an it girl if I could, like, just sense their confidence, even if they're,
Yes.
like...
It's a mentality.
It's a mentality
Sure.
thing.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah.
like, I'm a so I could sense like...
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It's like, okay, we're calling this show gaydar, but maybe it should just be You know what I mean? Like, you know,
Yeah.
we'll change the name. We'll change
Oh, I
the
love
episode
that.
just for you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ananaya. This is Dar. Let the people know your name and your pronouns.
Hey, y'all. It's Aaliyah's interlude, and my pronouns are she, her.
Period. Okay, we got it. Rate these in order of queerness.
Okay.
We have mermaids, aliens, and vampires.
Oh, yeah. Vampires are gay as
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Interview with a Vampire. You ever watch that? That's a gay ass show. Like,
Yeah, very
I'm
gay.
so happy you watched that. I
Come
was literally on the front line.
They're
trying to get you
all
to watch
so
that show.
queer.
Mermaids is definitely gay because I never seen a male mermaid for real.
But they're there.
They are. I feel like the
Allegedly.
girl ones we definitely.
Because they're
Yeah.
Well, yes, of course. Aliens. I don't think they're gay.
like, because I can imagine a straight alien. You know
Me
what
too.
I mean?
Yeah.
That's the
Me
thing.
too.
So are you saying vampires are more gay than mermaids, or
Yes, they're
Yeah.
way more gay.
work? Okay.
They're gay as fuck.
I'm okay with that list. I
Yeah.
debate that. Name a queer icon.
That's how I would have ranked things too. I think vampires very pan-coded. You know, aliens, although I feel like aliens this is where there are a lot of like gender non-conforming people who feel a kinship towards aliens, or this transness of feeling like you exist outside of what is considered the quote-unquote norm, as we're talking about colonial systems today, you know, and every day, really. Zupador said that was my favorite word. That made me laugh. I was like, yeah, you're not wrong. But yeah, I feel like mermaids, so much sapphic energy. So much sapphic energy. Even if the dudes are more present in lore, yeah, there's a lot of femme energy overall.
Icon from your childhood.
Ooh. Like they was openly queer.
Who knows? I'm not here to out them.
Bugs
You are.
Bunny.
Bugs Bunny?
Yes.
What a diva!
No, I feel like Lola is Bugs Bunny's beard. If you really
Yep.
think about it.
I need you to write the op-ed. I need
Yep.
you to write it. Like, I would.
On my
no,
Substack?
that's on your Substack.
Like, actually.
Yes.
I'd read that.
What's the gayest cocktail?
Oh, vodka Red Bull is the gayest cocktail. The gays love just something that'll have them.
Yeah, it has my community in a shackle.
Literally.
Like, oh my God. I'd also like to put Shirley Temples up there.
You think? I'm going to Shirley Temple.
I think an
Everybody loves
espresso
Shirley
martini
Temple,
is
Right,
also
but maybe
very
that's
gay.
the key.
though. Okay, T.
Maybe that's what we need.
Hell yeah.
Peace. Can you tell me what a stud is?
Okay. My hair. My ring is stuck.
I got you.
Thank ya. Is it better now? Thank you.
Can you define what a stud is?
Demon, demonic, evil. The last stud I with broke my heart so crazy. Like,
Sure.
I hate studs. No shade. That's not even a question, but like, a stud is like
You just had to get that off your chest.
Yeah. But to the answer to the question, a stud is like a black masculine lesbian.
Yes, correct.
Right?
And do you have any example of what a stud might name themselves?
They names be like the girliest names, and then they change it to some
Yeah.
shit like I don't f***ing know.
Big E.
Big E, yeah. Whole
We
time
got-
her name Estelle. Like, you're not Big E. You're not.
You're not. No, we got you, T.
Yeah, we got that T.
I don't know. Pine coat? I don't.
It be shit that's just like, okay, we know you made that up.
I used to be a stud.
Fuck. I'm just like looking, like I'm finding things that you can see.
No, I don't believe that.
I used to be a stud. Like, I can
Really?
do it too. I can
feel
do
like
it
you're
too.
so
They make
girly,
it look
though.
like it's hard and it's not.
Okay, so you don't
Anyway.
think it's hard to be a stud? I feel like it's kind of hard
That's
to
a
be
different.
a stud.
That's a different conversation for a different show. This is dar.
Not stud, dar.
Right. We're not talking about no gaydar. Okay.
Period.
Name a song that references bisexuals.
What's that one Doechii song where she's like,
you go. I knew you were
eating
gonna
box,
say-
sweaty, watching Hulu.
Yeah.
That's Nissan Altima, right?
Yeah. You got
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
Okay. You did pretty good.
Such a
I wasn't
good
worried
song.
about you.
Doechii came out
If I had
as
to guess if you were
lesbian.
gay, straight, or a homophobe,
Love that.
I think you might be bi too.
Okay, I feel like I'm pansexual because everyone thinks
know.
bisexuals are annoying, so I can't be
Sure.
in that.
Sure.
that
You know what? I'm pan too. Put it there. Period. Yay! I wonder if there's a difference between
Yep.
bisexuality. Me trying to get comments.
Literally.
I wonder if there's a difference between bisexual and pansexuality. You guys let us know.
Yeah, I don't really know the difference. I identify as both. How about that?
Period.
That was a sudden ending. Love both of them. Okay. I'm finishing chewing. Okay. Now that that's done, my chewing. Shall we get back to this video by the consciously, the AI land grab, how data centers threaten Indigenous sovereignty. Let's go back just a little bit. Since I had it up yesterday, because for whatever reason, when I do this, if I don't refresh it, it goes like, content not found. So I'm going to refresh it, but try to remember where we left off. So 2034.
Of indigeneity, you feel me, native identities, idea of an open frontier, you know.
Easy to have no value. They building multi-million-dollar, trillion-dollar,
then
billion-dollar industries.
Why do they need generative AI to build entire dossiers on people, right?
Yeah.
If they're not valuable, if they're not valuable people, why are they building these entire systems to track the data around these people, right?
Yeah.
That's what's valuable about it. Oklahoma, at the same time we're having a hyperscale data center boom, we're also a mass incarceration capital of the world.
For sure,
right?
for sure.
disproportionately to our population. We're not the most incarcerated in terms of numbers, but like Texas and Louisiana is.
But I mean, when I was here, for sure, specifically, Oklahoma was the #1 state in the country for the rising number of incarcerating women, specifically women of color, but really women, period. And it was like per capita, Oklahoma was incarcerating the most women out of any other state. And I think that, you know, the missing and murdered Native women, and the intersections of criminalizing Native women, and how Oklahoma, one of them weird states that like Black and indigeneity got this weird harmonious, but also very intention, like relationship that has tension, you know what I'm saying? And I think Oklahoma, it plays out a lot when it comes to the incarceration of women specifically. We seen the intersection and identities, really how you know what I'm saying, how we seeing how it happened. When I know when I was here, I was a part of a few campaigns where we raised money to bond out women for Mother's Day.
Yes.
And then, I mean, we did a campaign where we was able to help mothers get their kids presents for Christmas.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? The women, Black and Native, you feel me? I'm getting wrong, some poor whites in there, you know what I'm saying? Definitely some poor whites, you know what I mean? Shout out to y'all,
absolutely.
definitely was in there, but it was an over-representation of Black and Native women, disproportionate for sure, and it was like, hey, we ain't even a population up in here. So, you know, how a lot of times to justify taking over a data center might be devaluing the community, and they might do that based off of showing you arrest data. And you know how we gonna do? We gonna over-police the community to justify over-criminalizing the community, and of course it's gonna lead to over-incarceration. So now we can justify, hey, listen, developers, this piece of shit land right here ain't worth much. It's a bunch of degenerates, a bunch of and take they shit. You feel me? And I think that's what I know about here. My question though, 'cause I know you've been here, so you know what has been the conversation specifically on Native land, and specifically what I know was going on in East Oklahoma, where it was like the jurisdiction of this specific tribe was up against Oklahoma's jurisdiction, and it made it where a bunch of different cases, like the Oklahoma state didn't have jurisdiction over this part.
Talking about the McGirt decision.
McGirt decision, but thinking about how this impacting, so shit, this land, when it was first apprehended, it didn't take into account that this was also, you feel me, Native land. Now you're trying to sell a data center, and this land is a part of Oklahoma, you know what I'm saying, the state of Oklahoma, but also this a part of them people land, their Native land. Is it now like any like land disputes that's coming up that I could look around or tell my audience about? Because in my mind, it has to be like some complications. You trying to get some land. The people, the white folks sold it to you, but a part of this land is in this, or this land gonna have a bad impact on Native land, even though it is being sold to you, white people, you know.
Let me say this.
Or your concerns.
Let me say this. That I think, so at my job, I mean, with Honor the Earth, we've worked with we've both worked with tribal governments, and we've also worked with municipal governments. I can't speak specifically onto how the McGirt decision is affecting specifically data centers, because that's not, I mean, I'm not in that.
Yeah, definitely. It's real.
But I will say that the lack of regulation outside of tribal governance, just regarding municipalities and the state and then counties, right? It's creating a lot of issues when it comes to protecting communities at large. One of the major things that I think we should bring attention to is what's happening near McAllister, Oklahoma. Right now, there are unincorporated lands that are being targeted by an international corporation, international data development company. And they want to put a hyperscale project over there in Pittsburgh County. But what's happening is there are no protections. They don't default to municipal protections because there is not a protection for the land specifically that they want to put the data center on. So what happens is they default to state regulations, which there are none. So one thing that we've seen is that they didn't even notify the rural water district that they would be drawing water from about the project ahead of time.
See, that's what I mean.
You see what I'm saying? And so there are no protections for this community. But at large, in terms of our engagement with, you know, tribal governments across Oklahoma, they've been, like I said, beneficial because, you know, then the Seminole Nation was able to unanimously 24-0 pass a permanent moratorium, a permanent ban on data centers on Seminole Nation lands. And we also have partnered with other tribes as well, like the Cherokee Nation, for example. They are doing a study, which is like bare minimum that other places are not doing. They're not doing effective studies on the actual impacts of data centers to decide whether or not they should adopt it. So yeah, we've supported multiple moratoriums that at the municipal level that are adjacent to tribal lands, like in Tulsa, that backs up to kind of Cherokee Nation jurisdiction. And so, yeah, I mean, moratorium is better than nothing, but honestly, we got to start pushing.
Up the cells. Oh, hello, Bunso. Welcome. Sorry, I was looking up something and the chat was blocked. Good to see you. I'm doing all right. And yes, if you need to head out, that's totally fine. Hope you're doing well.
For bans, we really got to start pushing for it, because I think what's happening in those situations is there's a pressure building with, you know, various governments to put a moratorium to appease the people.
And what is moratorium for people that's watching?
It's a pause. Okay. It's a pause on rezoning, any types of approvals for these projects, right? It's a pause. So they'll do it for 6 months, they'll do it for a year. Oklahoma cities, they can lift it whenever they want.
You know what that sound like, y'all? A ceasefire. Temporary.
We could get into that, but I'll say that what's happening is they will pass a moratorium, but again, enact exemptions to where they can exempt things that are already in the rezoning process, or they can finish the moratorium and then, you know, continue with business as usual, because a lot of folks are signing NDAs ahead of time or profiting locally from the projects that are being put in their areas. So we're seeing people sell out their people, sell out future generations, sell out the water, sell out everything, just for a short-term gain.
Yeah.
That's something that we haven't seen in Utah. It's happening all over the country, all over the world for data centers. But as what happened in Utah, there were a number of politicians who bought up all of this land. And the timing, of course, is suspicious, because guess what? They are part of the problem where it's not an accident when they are buying up certain kinds of land, which they shouldn't be able to do anyway as politicians, in order to use their office to enrich themselves. Imagine that. But doing this at times where then they go shopping right after for people who want to buy the land to build on. So this is where we had Kevin O'Leary. Isn't that his name? The Shark Tank guy. Yes. I don't know why I like spaced for a sec. I was like, is that his actual name? Because I try not to think about him too much. Because he also is like he's the face of a lot of the data center movement in resistance that is happening in Utah, or not the resistance movement, but he is the face of building data centers, that it has been noticed mostly because he already had some fame and name recognition being on Shark Tank, that stupid show. I never cared about that show, still don't. So there we go. I never cared to watch capitalists be like, this is a good idea, and be like, we're going to fund this. It was incredibly boring to me, and also just capitalism. that is what it is. Anyway, that like this concept is happening everywhere. All of the implementation of politicians buying up land, or private interests buying up land, or private interests actually paying to fund campaigns for politicians who then buy up this land, or who then make decisions to help approve all of these processes for zoning or rezoning, or just completely revamping the zoning system for some of these projects that are happening, or classifying them as military projects. So like that immediately should be concerning to all of us, these red flags of like, yeah, it's about surveillance and about like manufacturing weapons or using AI to make military decisions, which again can't be separated from the stealing of land, colonial extraction and oppression, that it is happening in these rural areas, and that the people involved sign NDAs, that when there are people who are coerced into selling their land by saying, like, oh, well, we are going to like run you out of business and stuff, like that often happens. And then you also have some people that just don't care and want the money for the land, and that they then sign NDAs, and people can't talk about the inner workings of everything that is going on, and that is intentional, obviously, to make it so that people are not talking about the processes, so people are understanding how all of this is happening, so that there can be more efficient resistance to what is going on. That keeping the public in the dark about what is happening, what steps are being taken, that it is in their interests, the ruling class, these politicians, these billionaires who are engaged in all of this bullshit, that they are invested in our ignorance and invested in the decimation of our lands and these ecosystems, indigenous sovereignty, and in human life.
Fortunately.
Yeah. And what's the organization you work for now?
I work for Honor the Earth. I'm actually in development, but I work for Honor the Earth. It's a over 30-year-old Indigenous.
That's the website I shared above.
Led organization. It's actually it's all led by Indigenous women right now. It's great. And we do organizing on the ground in Oklahoma, Montana, South Dakota. And then we also have a coalition that we lead of organizers that are from across Turtle Island. So we've also been kind of moving into global partnerships. You know, we've had organizers in various different places at various times. We're sending a delegation to Ireland, which is also fiercely fighting against data centers over there across the Atlantic. And so, yeah. We do a lot of different things, and we connect all the different dots on all of these ways that we're extracted from. So,
yeah, and how can my audience that's interested help out? Is there a link that y'all raise money on? Is there a campaign that y'all are doing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So honortheearth.org is going to be your best place to find all of these things. We also have a data center toolkit that is helping people kind of do their own campaigns against data centers in their communities, because it takes literally all of us. And yeah, you'll find resources there. You'll find a donation link. We have a shop. If you want our shirt, Ask Your Auntie Not AI. We got some cool drops coming up because we're in the middle of our summer solstice campaign.
Man, Ask Your Auntie Not AI. Yeah, man. Education is elevation.
Yes, it is.
There will be, you know, as y'all always know, works cited as well as related readings that y'all can tune into, that y'all can dig into to learn more about data centers, learn more about the McGirt decision, as well as learning more about history here in Oklahoma. Shout out to y'all.
While having this conversation with Taylor, sitting on her porch, I was reminded of so much because it was around the corner from the very house that I ever purchased in my life. Me and my wife, first home that we bought that made us homeowners, goddamn, was right around the corner. And it being in Indian territory, you know, and having this conversation about native land and about open frontiers, I thought about how a lot of my ideals of the American dream was always already on type of native land and on top of native bodies, and how the idea of the open frontier and, you know, social media, data centers, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, how it's all.
And the end. Got a couple of abrupt endings. It's like, okay, do the work, continue. All right. Let us move right along. So this is the video from Andrewism that I wanted to watch. LandBack, the Indigenous Liberation Movement. This came out 5 years ago, so clearly, you know, this has been happening ever since pre-contact with colonizers all over the world in resisting colonization. So something that we have talked about here before is how decolonization, viewed as like a theory within academia, was starting to be accepted more in like the 50s and 60s. But obviously, there has been decolonial thought for as long as colonization has existed. So just throwing that out there of wanting to recognize when certain things are viewed as valid or as acceptable, in order to pursue academically, that most of the time this is when you have a white bourgeois class that is saying that this is okay to actually explore, to think about, and therefore it is more easily controlled in that manner. But that doesn't mean that thought and resistance hasn't been incredibly robust before that.
Since the very dawn of colonialism across the globe, for centuries, Indigenous peoples have been fighting back against their oppression. In a way, to be Indigenous is to be in constant warfare, as they resist threats to their sovereignty, economic well-being, cultures, languages, ways of knowing, and access to the resources on which their societies depend. I think the ideas, concepts, and practices of Indigenous peoples are severely under-discussed, underappreciated, and underrepresented by, well, everyone. There's so much we can learn from the diverse cultures, philosophies, and worldviews that are under the umbrella of indigeneity. I want to do what I can to highlight these ideas in the coming year. Starting with one of the most vital, yet one of the most misunderstood, are the many currents of decolonization and Indigenous praxis. LandBack. Before we begin, I want everyone to understand that this video is introductory. LandBack is complex and it can't be easily summarized into a 10 to 15 minute video, so just keep that in mind.
Hello,
To understand
Linton.
LandBack and what's back,
Welcome.
we need to understand
Good to see
settlerism
you.
and
How are you
colonialism,
doing?
or more simply, settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is an ongoing project by settler states like the US, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Israel, and others. It involves external colonialism, also called settlerism, which is when a colonizing power exports settlers, resources, knowledge, plants, metals, weapons, and/or animals to increase its wealth and land, like when the European Empire shipped millions of armed colonists to settle North America, many as indentured servants. And it involves internal colonialism, which is marked by the violence.
Doing good. How was your day? Glad to hear that you're doing well. Thank you for redeeming the sassy stars, the channel points. We're getting there, closer to the goal. I'll play my first video game. And it looks like we are more than halfway through, so that's exciting. My day is all right, you know, just trying to do a lot of adult things and making money, surviving. You know, today's a little bit of a shorter day. I don't know why, I keep getting more migraines lately. So we'll see how long I go today. But, you know, just limiting my screen time, which having a very Luddite heart that fits with my capacity, my mental capacity. But glad to hear you're doing well.
Management of a colonized people and lands within the borders of the imperial nation through ghettos, reservations, police, schools, prisons, that sort of thing. A good example of internal colonialism would be the residential schools in the US and Canada up to the 20th century.
So what he was just mentioning of like this, the practice of importing and exporting human beings, that this is commodification of human life within colonialism, which is why, you know, I like to talk about it, and, you know, many other people like to talk about colonialism as just being inherently capitalist, that capitalism is inherently colonial, that we have a through line of colonialism when we are talking about feudalism, talking about capitalism. and this area of transition between feudalism and capitalism. Supposedly, that's something that we'll be talking about more today with Caliban and the Witch that we'll be reading from. But this element of and the atrocities that go into importing people who are not indigenous to a land to supposedly settle the land, which just means impose domination over the land and the people there, that there is also exporting of human beings, and this often happens with human trafficking, indentured servitude. This is something that White Buffalo Circles, that creator that we watch sometimes, Joel, the host of White Buffalo Circles, does a really excellent job with education. I will pull up that channel to share. But that is something that he was talking about as the history of Turtle Island specifically. But of course, it is not exclusive to Turtle Island. This happens with any colonial project. How with Turtle Island, there are people who are coming to settle, but then there was the importing of Black people from Africa as well, and how there was an exporting of Indigenous people to also be part of this human trafficking network that is embedded in colonialism. Also, I will share Andrewism's account as well, so that people can subscribe to their content, follow them.
Indigenous children from their families and strip them of their cultures. Settler colonialism can be best summarized as the empire and the colony existing in the same geographical space. Settler colonialism is a process of destroying to replace. Indigenous versions of governance, land management, cultural practices, etc. are destroyed through colonization and replaced with the settler version of those things, which are often radically different. The land stolen from indigenous peoples was then worked by peoples stolen from their own lands. Interestingly, it took the subversive collaboration of indigenous peoples, ruining slaves, and runaway Europeans for settlers to invent and propagate the racial hierarchy in order to create divisions among the exploited. In colonial Virginia, the lives of English, indigenous, and African indentured servants and slaves were quite similar at first. They were owned by their masters, and they worked shoulder to shoulder in the tobacco fields. Still, they sought relief from their grueling labor and difficult work conditions, so they'd run away, sometimes together. Yet when they were caught, their punishments were much different. In July...
Yes, so like him talking about this element of hierarchies, how it's not an accident as well of people who were often sold into indentured servitude who were white, who were racialized as white, were other areas that were being colonized. So the area of the Scottish Highlands and Ireland and Wales, that, you know, it is all part of this larger colonial project.
1640, 3 servants were captured in Maryland. 2 were white, and they were whipped and had 4 years added to their indentures. The third was a black man, and he was made a slave for life. That was the first legal distinction between Europeans and Africans made by Virginia courts. See, it's all connected. Settler colonialism isn't some simple historical moment or period. It's an ongoing structure that maintains and impacts everything in a settler state. Settler states like the US are built on settler colonization and slavery. That's not something that can be reformed away. And the initial acts of settler colonialism are what laid the foundation for its current acts. It took, for example, the eviction of Oregon's indigenous peoples to give precedence to evictions as a whole in Oregon, something even non-indigenous peoples are dealing with today. Fighting settler colonialism involves a whole complex process of decolonization, which is deserving of its own video. LandBack is just one part of that process. LandBack. LandBack. A contraction of land and back. So let's start there. What is land? Well, it isn't just a plot of dirt. Humans grew out the earth, and our history remains rooted in our use of land and territory, from ecosystem management to resource extraction to expansionism. And with that expansionism comes the erasure of indigenous peoples and dispossession of their lands. The various powers of Europe are quite famous for this. In 1800, Western powers held roughly 35% of the Earth's surface. By 1878, they held 67%, and by 1914, European powers held a grand total of 85% of the Earth.
I'm gonna grab a drink really quick, refill my water, but I'll be right back. I'll keep this
But the way
playing.
they're twisted, huh? Asian powers like Japan and China don't have their hands clean either. Yet despite those claims, indigenous peoples never completely lost the connection to lands and waters. Colonizing powers used violent occupation, repeated displacement, and forced assimilation, all in an effort to eliminate the political alternative that indigenous peoples represent. But they couldn't and can't hide the land, so they have to resort to breaking the collective consciousness. Worse yet, they get to brush off this violence as unfortunate history, if they acknowledge it at all, while ignoring the very present violence. Take for example the Wet'suwet'en Nation, who are facing eviction from their lands and poisoning of their water by the Coastal GasLink Pipeline Company.
People get confused about what we want as Native people. It's like, what do you want? It's just like, land back.
But it's as simple as possible.
I don't need any reconciliation. I don't want money. I don't want, like, I don't want programs or funding or whatever. Just land back.
Land back.
It's funny, though, when I said that to my dad, you know, to Gitsan Wet'suwet'en people, if you tell them about land back, they're like, we never lost the land anyway. Which is true.
When such discussions about land back are had, it's simplified to, oh, they just want to own the land. Except, land is more than just land. More than just property or a means of accumulating capital. There's a stark contrast between settler colonial and indigenous people's conception of land. In
Yes.
settler colonial,
Which is why decolonization, indigenous way of life is so threatening to capitalism, which is so threatening to obviously colonialism, because it is a different way of thinking about life, of human life, of ecosystems, life that is non-human, and how we are all interconnected. And instead of viewing the land as something to be dominated and owned, to be commodified, like what Andrewism is talking about, it is something that should be lived with in harmony, instead of wanting to use it for gaining more capital, gaining more power, especially in these hierarchies, that there instead is a flattened way of having a circular way of looking at life rather than a top-down way of looking at life, which is just, I guess, another way of saying hierarchy.
societies, the relationship to land is based on ownership and exploitation. Private property is accumulated and dominated by individuals, the bourgeoisie, to be exploited. But indigenous peoples see land as a whole social relationship, to which all living and non-living beings belong rather than own. Settler policy seeks to replace those relationships and the full sovereignty of indigenous peoples with domination via municipal puppets, corporate development, and patriarchal politics. Indigenous connection to the land goes deep, as though the land owns instead of just the land is owned. That connection can't be taken, stolen, or given back. And it's a connection that settlers, people who engage in settlerism, do not have. Land back, more significantly, is about how we relate to the land, how we relate to each other through it, and how it defines us. Land isn't just a place. So, what about the back part of land back? Well, it isn't simply signing some documents and giving indigenous peoples legal rights over the land as private property. Like I said, those concepts didn't exist prior to colonization. The back part also can't remain returning to pre-colonial conditions either. As Frantz Fanon discusses in The Wretched of the Earth, there is no way to return to a pristine pre-colonial time. Decolonization isn't about going back to the pre-colonial, and it isn't just focused on indigenous peoples either, the colonized. Decolonization must also involve the colonizer deconstructing the cultures and ideologies that maintain that domination and colonization. It's not that colonizers have to be deported, it's that they can't continue to engage in the whole settler colonial system. The back part means a reassertion of sovereignty and consent. No more pipelines, no more police, no more fraud treaties, no more colonial institutions. That's what it will take to eliminate the settler state. The complete and total dissolution of the colonization that props it up. LandBack is about ending the violence inflicted not only on Indigenous peoples, but also on Mother Earth. Only 5% of the world's population is composed of Indigenous peoples living on their ancestral lands. But these people protect 80% of the planet's biodiversity, the heart and health of the Earth itself. These people, and the non-human life they exist with, are under threat by state and capital. LandBack seeks to challenge that, reasserting lands from the colonizing entities. LandBack is a method of direct action. Even now, such battles are being fought across the world, from Chiapas to Rojava to Tibet to Palestine to all over the so-called United States and Canada. The various movements associated with LandBack each deserve the respect of a video of their own. But to summarize, quoting the LandBack Manifesto, it is a reclamation of everything stolen from the original peoples. It is a relationship with Mother Earth that is symbiotic and just, where we have reclaimed stewardship. It is bringing our people with us as we move towards liberation and embodied sovereignty through an organizing, political, and narrative framework. It is a long legacy of warriors and leaders who sacrificed freedom and life. It is a catalyst for current generation organizers and centers the voices of those who represent our future. It is recognizing that our struggle is interconnected with the struggles of all oppressed peoples. It is a future where Black reparations and Indigenous LandBack coexist, where BIPOC collective liberation is at the core. It is acknowledging that only when Mother Earth is well, can we, her children, be well. It is our belonging to the land. LandBack is about land, yes, but it's also about freedom. Land and freedom. Tierra y libertad, the rallying cry in the Indigenous fight against settler colonialism during the Mexican Revolution. Land and freedom. They're interdependent concepts, each transforming the meaning of the other. Land linked to freedom means a habitat to be freely interrelate with, to shape and be shaped by, unburdened by imposition or ideology. Freedom linked to land means a self-organization of all activity that is vital to our humanity, which we direct to achieve sustenance on our own terms, not as isolated units, but as living beings within a web of wider relationships. So, how do we get there? How do we partake in LandBack? What does that look like in practice? LandBack really starts in the mind. It starts with decolonizing your own psyche. You were colonized, are colonized, and are thus responding to life circumstances in ways that are limited, destructive, and externally controlled. It starts with questioning the dominant narratives and power structures you were indoctrinated into accepting, and then creating, restoring, and birthing. Creating various strategies to liberate yourself, restoring your cultural practices that were taken or abandoned, but you now need for survival. Birthing new ideas, thinking, technologies, and lifestyles that contribute to the advancement and empowerment of colonized peoples. It's deeply personal, so it'll look differently for different people. But I see the ongoing process in many fellow colonized people these days, and that gives me hope. With every tradition remembered and language relearned, colonized people begin to heal. And with that healing and learning comes the next step in the LandBack process. Direct action. Tactics will need to be varied, of course. Dragging colonizers and gentrifiers on social media is a part of it, as is going after hated and unpopular banks, slumlords, and governments. It builds a large narrative and grows our support. Raising funds to buy the land and pressuring the legal owners to cede the land can also help. There's also protests, blockades, disruptions, and other Minecraft stuff I can't divulge here. Most vital to LandBack praxis is, of course, seizing and effectively defending the lands and peoples from further violence. Yet none of these methods can stand alone. A lot of these methods leave the structures of capitalism intact. Even the most radical method, seizing the land, still allows the legal owner to maintain their claim and eventually muster state support for a violent crackdown.
Painting.
Do seize the lands held ransom by the settler state though. And when we have it, we can build relationship with it. undermining the long history of dispossession, enslavement, and exploitation. That seizing, that expropriation, is not just material, it's also spiritual, it's transformative. It takes land out of the realm of property and into a world of community, where capitalist value has no meaning. Refusing to recognize the commodification of land and totally rejecting the social contract of capitalism changes a person. As land is seized, strong networks are built, resources and experiences are shared, and perspectives are broadened. We're fundamentally transformed for the better. But that doesn't mean that seizing and occupying land, water, and buildings is going to be easy. Autonomous zones, with the aim of restoring Indigenous consent on land, are not a simple matter. Spaces have been seized before, some successfully, like the aforementioned Chiapas, and others not so much. The term autonomous zone might have sprung Capitol Hill in your mind. Many point to it as a failure of autonomous zones or something, but despite the excited claims of Twitter radicals, CHOP, that is the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, first known as CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, was not set up to last. Demands aside, it was meant to be a space for learning and for temporary reprieve from the onslaught of police during an incredibly violent period in US civil rights history. Yet, CHOP low-key perpetuated colonialism, only paying lip service to the Duwamish Nation, the first people of what is now Seattle. They were co-opted by liberals from the very beginning, and they were de-radicalized. And that's not even mentioning the 2 black teens that were killed in the area. CHOP was a mess. At least Camp Maroon and Camp Teddy in Philadelphia, after a few months, were able to secure a community land trust for the homeless people of Philadelphia. What did CHOP accomplish? I digress. We have to think long too. Occupying a space with no plan going forward is futile.
So the fact that he is mentioning movements being co-opted by liberals, this can't be underestimated, especially as we are having more widespread resistance with these colonial tactics. The thing that is difficult, especially in organizing with liberals, is the fact that they do not see these tactics as being colonial, that they do not see, or many people, I guess I should say, do not see this type of resistance as being interconnected with other types of resistance that exist. And so this is where it is important to be looking for signs as to if a movement is being co-opted and defanged to be less militant, when there is a lot of suppressing people having opinions and criticism in particular, if there is a hierarchy that is being perpetuated in general, if it is not done by this what is the term? Oh my god. Free association of, like, if people do not agree with a kind of action, then they do not have to move forward with it, and that the people who are agreeing with it can pursue types of action, but that the group is not trying to limit the types of action that is existing, especially when it comes to suppressing more militant action, and where there are especially groups of people, especially with the more intersections of marginalization that people experience, that there are necessary steps taken in order to have self-preservation when resisting these colonial forces. And this is where you can have a lot of respectability politics go in and say, like, oh, this shouldn't happen, or you shouldn't be engaging in this. And it is just a way to minimize diversity of tactics. Like I said, respectability politics, but also having a specific type of resistance that is often viewed as acceptable by the state and the state's violence, when it is the state that is perpetuating the most violence to begin with. And so it has to, this is where we all must be considering what kind of resistance is moving the needle, and if it is worth our time and energy even engaging in certain types of resistance movements, in organizing. and that it is okay to take a step back from places that you feel like you are not being listened to, or that it is not intersectional, that it is appealing to the oppressive powers that are causing all of this violence and dehumanization to begin with. So like, I know that many people can feel guilty in taking a step back from certain places, but like, it's okay to be looking out for yourself, to be looking out for the energy that you are expending, because there may be like guilt tactics that are applied. But it is a good to be able to continue to resist and have that resistance be very targeted in ways that you feel like align with your own values and ideology.
And struggle with no end in sight other than total destruction. While our failures do provide opportunities for learning and transformation, and we will fail often, we can't subsist on failure. Which gives rise to two questions. How to strike a balance between caution and confrontation so we don't become pacified or lose opportunities to progress. And when we do fail, how do we fail in a way that inspires, that spreads and strengthens the legitimacy of our project? I'll leave a link with my sources and resources down below that can provide better details for praxis. Like I said before, this video is just an introduction. Settler structures need to be dismantled completely, and that starts somewhere and everywhere, even if that somewhere is your mind. LandBack is one arduous step by one grueling step forward to free land and eventually the whole world from the grips of domination. The tactics of our rulers change as the centuries plod on, but the overall colonizer strategy remains the same. A consistent war on our minds and bodies, to wear us down in the long run and remove the challenge to their legitimacy that our resistance, and especially Indigenous people's resistance, represents. Think of how it must feel to be constantly told there will be no restitution for centuries of oppression and genocide. That's an emotional assault that we need to fight back against. All of us need to support Indigenous peoples in this fight for land back, in any capacity they need. Truth is, you're either for liberation and all the various forms it will take, or you're against it. Are we in this together or not? Land back is less a future to achieve and more an action to take on today. Solidarity forever. Peace. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Kurt
Very
for his
cool.
support in this video. This feedback on the script really helped. As usual, I have a new Patreon post. This week, I'm reading a poem from a traveler in my solar-punk Caribbean world who's returning home and has some thoughts on the land they grew up on. Hope you all enjoy. Thanks once again to the family, Ongrad and Suavocado Jones. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/saintdrew. Or you can give a one-time donation on ko-fi.com/saintdrew. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow peoples. Feed the algorithm. Check my previous videos for other fascinating topics. You can follow me on Twitter @_saintdrew, and check my monthly blog posts on Trinidadian politics and other stuff on saint-drew.medium.com. Thanks again. Peace.
Very cool. So, something that he mentioned, I saw him reference this LandBack. This is primarily a campaign and comms effort that is being done to spread awareness on LandBack. You know, there are a number of people who have been critical of the co-opting of this term, that this campaign can accept government money as a nonprofit in order to continue working, that there is criticism of not being crowdsourced, rather taking money from governments that are oppressing us. So, like, keeping that in mind. But how it is good to have some resources and education and learning about movements that are happening, and where there are current events being highlighted. This is a movement that is Indigenous led as well, so just holding all of this nuance at once I think is very important, especially where like we are able to get more information from people who are able to talk about their own personal experience. Indigenous-led political, relational organizing, and meta-narrative framework from which we work toward collective liberation. So, there we go. You can see like the podcasts that they have, stories that they highlight. I think it also brings up the question of, can we have effective resistance movements in having it be part of a system that is funded by oppressive systems, and how the government plays a role in controlling what people can even be talking about. I mean, the government is spearheading these oppressive policies and the implementation of these policies, so that we are limited if we are only going through that avenue of having state-sanctioned resistance. But it is also good, in my mind, to have more stories be highlighted, have the means to show what is going on across Turtle Island and the world at large. I mean, the campaign that I just showed, they focus mostly on Turtle Island, but how they have been at the forefront of challenging some of these policies of the government wanting to sell lands, especially what they consider to be public lands, which is really just government owned. So, like, there are nuances to this, and so there are many people who disagree with the approach, and that is completely valid. Then there are other people that think it is just one piece of the puzzle. I tend to fall into that camp of saying, like, whatever type of, how far you are down in the funnel of decolonizing your mind, our minds, that, you know, there are steps to this, and that there are various roles that we can all be playing, but that we shouldn't be limiting ourselves to one particular strategy. That in and of itself is a way to limit the kinds of diversity of tactics that are so necessary for our collective liberation. So just calling out all of that. That there are many aspects of being co-opted, and how, like with any type of movement, and that the sentiment of LandBack shouldn't be exclusive to just one particular campaign that people are also monetarily benefiting from, so calling that out. But that it is a larger sentiment that extends to the entire world, and that it starts, like what Andrewism was saying, with our own minds. Okay, so speaking about indigeneity, colonization, oppressive structures that exist, who is considered acceptable in these oppressive systems and who is not, let us transition, because same, into Caliban and the Witch, written by Silvia Federici. Hello, Zoop. Welcome. Decolonize your mind, and your ass will follow. George. I haven't heard that. Oh my god. That's amazing. I love that. Incredible. All right. Since we have been talking about Caliban and the Witch, and it being so central to decolonial thought, feminism, Marxism, I think it's like we have been talking about it, and you brought it up yesterday specifically, Zoop, and so it inspired me to get more into the text, because I've only read excerpts of it with my limited education. And now I'm reading it all the way through for the first time. And so it has been a delight. Thank you for bringing it up as well. Well, the album is just called Free Your Mind and Your Ass Will Follow, but similar idea. Okay, gotcha. I love that. That's amazing. As I was starting to read this in my first complete read through of this, I found this version online that I will also share. Because we need to have knowledge and resources readily available to us all. I wanted to share the preface and introduction. And then as I'm going through the text, applying it, especially as we are engaging in decolonial theory, thought, current events, relating it back to that, as well as Macbeth. Acknowledgements to the many witches I have met in the women's movement, and to the other witches whose stories have accompanied me for more than 25 years, nevertheless leaving an inexhaustible desire to tell, to let people know, to make sure that they will not be forgotten. To our brother Jonathan Cohen, whose love, courage, and uncompromising resistance to injustice have helped me not lose faith in the possibility of changing the world and in men's ability to make the struggle for women's liberation their own. Like, actually having decent allies, like giving credit where credit is due. I appreciate that. Also, how are you feeling, Zoop? If you aren't comfortable, you don't have to say if you don't want, but I hope you're doing okay. To the people who have helped me to produce this volume, I thank George Kafensis, with whom I have discussed every aspect of this book. Mitchell Cohen for his excellent comments, his editing of parts of the manuscript, and his enthusiastic support for this project. Usina Alidou and Maria Sari for introducing me to the work of Maurice Condé. Ferruccio Gambino for making me aware of the existence of slavery in 16th and 17th century Italy. David Goldstein for the materials he has given me on the witches' pharmacopoeia. Conrad Harold for contributing to my research on witch hunting in Peru, Massimo De Angelis for giving me his writings on primitive accumulation, and for the important debate on this topic which he organized in The Commoner. William Montunga for the materials he has given me on the legal aspects of witchcraft in East Africa. I thank Michaela Brennan and Vina Viswanatha for reading the manuscript and giving me advice and support. I also thank Maria Rosa Daya Costa, Nicolas Faraklas, Leopolda Fortunati, Everett Green, Peter Leinbau, Bene Mandunagu, Maria Mies, Ariel Sela, Hakim Bey. Their works have been a reference point for the perspective that shapes Caliban and the Witch, though they may not agree with all that I have written here. Special thanks to Jim Fleming, Sue Ann Harkey, Ben Myers, and Erica Biddle, who have given many hours of their time to this book, and with their patience and assistance have given me the possibility of finishing it, despite my endless procrastination. I think anybody who is writing a book experiences procrastination. I'm back. Welcome back, Clinton. Physically about the same, in a bit of a mood because I spent a lot of time on food that turned out poorly. Ugh, I hate when that happens. When it's like that takes like time and money and energy, and especially if it takes a while and you're excited about it, especially if you start when you're hungry and you're like, I'm banking on this. Yeah. I hate when that happens. Alright, so this is the table of contents. We get a woodcut here. That's very cool. Alright, and getting to the preface. Caliban and the Witch presents the main themes of a research project on women in the transition, because same, from feudalism to capitalism that I began in the mid-1970s in collaboration with an Italian feminist, Leopoldina Fortunati. Its first results appeared in a book that we published in Italy in 1984, Il Grande Calibano, Storial del corpo social rebel nea prima fase del capitale. My accent's horrible. Apologies. So, the Great Caliban, History of the Rebel Body in the First Phase of Capitalism. A lot of good art in here. I know, with like the woodcut, like very cool. And I appreciate, it's like, especially with this, first I do like to read the acknowledgments in books, especially things that have so much research that go into it, of like all of the people that are contributing and like their various lines of work that they are in, and thought that it just goes to show that art is not isolated. Damn, I wish I could find the comment I saw about the Hirbawi restock to thank them. Was just browsing again. They sold out quick. Really? I mean, people all over the world were looking forward to this restock, so that's not surprising. Like, hoping that, you know, it can continue for people to keep buying keffiyehs. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up as well. My interest in this research was originally motivated by the debates that accompanied the development of the feminist movement in the United States concerning the roots of women's oppression and the political strategies which the movement should adopt in the struggle for women's liberation. At the time, the leading theoretical and political perspectives from which the reality of sexual discrimination was analyzed were those proposed by the two main branches of the women's movement, the radical feminists and the socialist feminists. In my view, however, neither provided a satisfactory explanation of the roots of the social and economic exploitation of women. I objected to the radical feminists because of their tendency to account for sexual discrimination and patriarchal rule on the basis of transhistorical cultural structures, presumably operating independently of relations of production and class. Socialist feminists, by contrast, recognize that the history of women cannot be separated from the history of specific systems and exploitation, and in their analyses gave priority to women as workers in capitalist society. But the limit of their position, in my understanding of it at the time, was that it failed to acknowledge the sphere of reproduction as a source of value creation and exploitation, and thus trace the roots of the power differential between women and men to women's exclusion from capitalist development, a stand which again compelled us to rely on cultural schemes to account for the survival of sexism within the universe of capitalist relations. So this is often where we see like thinkers, theorists come to the research and thoughts that they do, is that there are limitations to what has come before, and often the information that is readily available or what is propped up as being accepted in the mainstream or what is even being noticed that hasn't been erased in history can be incredibly colonial in nature. So this is where we also have to be engaging with a queer lens as well, in saying that colonial systems have attempted and continue to erase queer people in history to uphold a gender binary of male and female, that sexism, that the discrimination of women, misogyny cannot be separated from upholding a patriarchal system that views anything that is female or femme as othered, which then is a way to suppress and oppress people who are outside of the gender binary, because that is inherently, there are so many indigenous identities and ways of life of just acceptance of humanity when it comes to gender expansiveness that fall outside of colonial systems. It was in this context that the idea of tracing the history of women in the transition from feudalism to capitalism took form. The thesis which inspired this research was first articulated by Maria Rosa D'Acosta and Selma James, as well as other activists in the wages for housework movement, in a set of documents that in the 1970s were very controversial, but eventually reshaped the discourse on women, reproduction, and capitalism. The most influential among them were Maria Rosa Diacosta's Women and the Subversion of the Community in 1971 and Selma James's Sex, Race, and Class. All right. Against the Marxist orthodoxy, which explained women's oppression and subordination to men as a residuum of feudal relations, Diacosta and James argued that the exploitation of women has played a central function in the process of capitalist accumulation, insofar as women have been the producers and reproducers of the most essential capitalist commodity, labor power. Also, can you all see this okay? I can zoom in more too. Here, I'll zoom in. There we go. So I didn't mean to highlight that, but... As Diacosta put it, women's unpaid labor in the home has been the pillar upon which the exploitation of the waged workers, wage slavery, has been built, and the secret of its productivity. Thus, the power differential between women and men in capitalist society, we have a typo there, cannot be attributed to the irrelevance of housework for capitalist accumulation, an irrelevance belied by the strict rules that have governed women's lives, nor to the survival of timeless cultural schemes. Rather, it should be interpreted as the effect of a social system of production that does not recognize the production and reproduction of the worker as a social economic activity and a source of capital accumulation, but mystifies it instead as a natural resource or a personal service, which profiting from the wageless condition of the labor involved. Yes. And how often this is viewed and justified through religious institutions in order to say, like, this is what a quote-unquote traditional family is, when it is upholding all of these hierarchical structures. I'm mostly just listening to you and reading the captions, but that's a good call. Okay. Yeah, want it to be a little bit legible, but also ingest, consume, however is most comfortable for you, obviously. By rooting the exploitation of women in capitalist society in the sexual division of labor and women's unpaid work, Diacosta and James showed the possibility of transcending the dichotomy between patriarchy and class, and gave patriarchy a specific historical content. They also opened the way for a reinterpretation of the history of capitalism and class struggle from a feminist viewpoint. It was in this spirit that Leopoldina Fortunati and I began to study what can only be euphemistically described as the transition to capitalism. Transing in the worst way possible. And began to search for a history that we had not been taught in school. How often that happens? The histories that we are not taught in school? Calling into question those systems and why we are taught certain things cannot be separated from upholding all of these systems. But proved to be decisive for our education. This history not only offered a theoretical understanding of the genesis of housework and its main structural components, the separation of production from reproduction, the specifically capitalist use of the wage to command the labor of the unwaged, and the devaluation of women's social position with the advent of capitalism. It also provided a genealogy of the modern concepts of femininity and masculinity that challenged the postmodern assumption of an almost ontological predisposition in Western culture, in quotes, to capture gender through binary oppositions. Yes, so this is where it is important to be calling out binary. I mean, not only in this instance, but where she is in particular. Sexual hierarchies, we found, are always at the service of a project of domination that can sustain itself only by dividing on a continuously renewed basis those it intends to rule. Yeah, so this is where, like, we also have to engage with thinkers who are talking about domination itself and whether there can be ethical domination at all. Like Audre Lorde, in one of her essays talking about sadomasochism in lesbian relationships specifically, that it is a way to perpetuate these hierarchies, in that we cannot be engaging in an ethical manner until we are all free. And so, like, I, like some other people, like, I mean, many other people can think, is that we have a limited capacity for consent when we are all experiencing global capitalism, all of the isms of discrimination and oppression, like ableism, sexism, queerphobia, xenophobia, ableism, racism. I think I might have repeated a couple of those, but all of the aspects that create hierarchies of human dignity, that until we are able to dissemble these things and have true equality, where we all have equal consent in our own lives and in society at large, that we all have a cheapened sense of consent. And that doesn't mean that we can't engage in ways where you have people who are actually valuing consent in any sort of activity, but especially as we were talking about like BDSM and kink in general, that it does not always have to be about power, although often it can be about power exchange. That it can be a way for people to be accessing consent in an ethical manner and to be subverting some of these power structures in a way that is radical and that makes it so we are operating outside of these other oppressive systems where our consent is limited, where we rarely consent to anything, really. So that is my perspective of that. Like, it doesn't mean that like any sort of activity that is within kink or BDSM, that it is unethical when we are existing in these systems of oppression, but rather that we all have a limited consent, that we can't truly be exercising it in our freest way possible until we are all free. We have collective liberation. The book that resulted from this research, Il Grande Calibano, Storia del Corpo Sociale Ribelle, Nea Prima Fase de Capitale, 1984, was an attempt to rethink Marx's analysis of primitive accumulation from a feminist viewpoint. But in this process, the received Marxian categories proved inadequate. Among the casualties was the Marxian identification of capitalism with the advent of wage labor and the free, quotes, laborer, which contributes to hide and naturalize the sphere of reproduction. Yes, of saying like, oh, we can't talk about what goes into human reproduction, especially when it is involving like pregnancy and childbirth, and that it is naturalized, of just expected of people, that is the default, rather than people actually consenting to go through this process, to even engage in a particular perception and conditioning of gender. Il Grande Calibano was also critical of Michel Foucault's theory of the body. As we argued, Foucault's analysis of the power techniques and disciplines to which the body has been subjected has ignored the process of reproduction, has collapsed female and male histories into an undifferentiated whole, and has been so disinterested in the disciplining, quotes, of women that it never mentions one of the most monstrous attacks on the body perpetrated in the modern era, the witch hunt. The main thesis in Il Grande Calibano was that in order to understand the history of women in the transition from feudalism to capitalism, we must analyze the changes that capitalism has introduced in the process of social reproduction, and especially the reproduction of labor power. Thus, the book examined the reorganization of housework, family life, child raising, sexuality, male-female relations, and the relation between production and reproduction in 16th and 17th century Europe. Yes, and also if we're engaging, like she did mention before, a binary, but this is where more like queer theory comes in to help fill in some of the gaps in this interpretation too, which, you know, she does engage with at times, but I think especially for people who have a queer experience, gender expansive experience, trans experience, can speak more to the details and from personal experience there. This analysis is reproduced in Caliban the Witch. However, the scope of the present volume differs from that of Il Grande Calibano as it responds to a different social context and to our growing knowledge of women's history. Shortly after the publication of Il Grande Calibano, I left the United States and took a teaching position in Nigeria, where I remained for nearly 3 years. Before leaving, I had buried my papers in a cellar, not expecting that I should need them for some time. But the circumstances of my stay in Nigeria did not allow me to forget this work. The years between 1984 and 1986 were a turning point for Nigeria, as for most African countries. These were the years when, in response to the debt crisis, the Nigerian government engaged in negotiations with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which eventually resulted in the adoption of a structural adjustment program, the World Bank Universal Recipe for Economic Recovery across the planet. The declared purpose of the program was to make Nigeria competitive on the international market, but it was soon apparent that this involved a new round of primitive accumulation and a rationalization of social reproduction aimed at destroying the last vestiges of communal property and community relations, and thereby impose more intense forms of labor exploitation. Thus, I saw unfolding under my eyes processes very similar to those that I had studied in preparation for Il Grande Calibano. Among them were the attack on communal lands, and it sound familiar? Of like people actually having land that is not owned by a particular entity, but how this is limited with the concept of public lands when a government has jurisdiction ownership over a land that is supposedly communal, so like decolonizing that. Among them were the attack on communal lands and a decisive intervention by the state instigated by World Bank in the reproduction of the workforce to regulate procreation rates and in this case reduce the size of a population that was deemed too demanding and indisciplined from the viewpoint of its prospected insertion of the global economy. So creating an in-group and an other. Along with these policies, aptly named the War Against Indiscipline, I also witnessed the fueling of a misogynist campaign denouncing women's vanity and excessive demands, and the development of a heated debate similar in many respects to the 17th century querelles des... Oh, that's French. Okay, as I'm like going between Italian and French. Querelles des femmes. Touching on every aspect of the reproduction of labor power, the family, polygamous versus monogamous, nuclear versus extended, child raising, women's work, male and female identity, and relations. In this context, my work on the transition took on a new meaning. In Nigeria, I realized that the struggle against structural adjustment is part of a long struggle against land privatization and the, quote, enclosure, close quote, not only of communal lands, but also of social relations that stretches back to the origin of capitalism in 16th century Europe and America. Found something cool for Culture Corner maybe. MC Abdul and artist J. Reem Saloom made this Where Waldo-style browser game for this new album release coming up, where you look for him throughout Gaza with some Easter egg stories hidden there. Whoa, that's so cool. Wow, thank you for sharing. This is an incredible find. Yeah, that's definitely going in the queue. Thank you very much. I also realized how limited is the victory that the capitalist work discipline has won on this planet, and how many people still see their lives in ways radically antagonistic to the requirements of capitalist production. For the developers, the multinational agencies, and foreign investors, this was and remains the problem with places like Nigeria. But for me, it was a source of great strength, as it proved that worldwide formidable forces still contrast the imposition of a way of life conceived only in capitalist terms. So also, like, talking about not just capitalism in the 16th century, although, like, this is where it is addressing capitalism being one and the same as colonialism, but not just like outrightly said in that manner. But that colonialism has existed before the 16th century. PGAP, thank you very much. Contributing. We are very close. We're very close to the goal of me starting a game. And Zoop, thank you very much. Wow. We're gonna meet this goal very quickly. I appreciate you all. Welcome, PGAP. Feel free to join in the conversation, lurk, whatever, however. Welcome to you. It might be done by tomorrow, I know. On a 5-stream streak, yes! Thank you very much. So lovely to have you here. You still have 20,000 left. Ah! I know. I'm like, okay, what are some other challenges we can be working towards? Someone once said, like, I think you should try out a handlebar mustache. Maybe I'll do that. I'll do a challenge. I mean, not like I need much reinforcement to want to do a handlebar mustache on a stream. But I think that may be the next one. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all. Sassy fan. I'm like, okay, where the fuck is my fan? Whoops, as I'm like hitting everything on my desk. Ooh, ooh. There you go. I've been like doing more fan work in my free time to be like, I need to diversify my fan portfolio. The working portfolio. Work with an E, by the way. Thank you for the redemption. Today's fit is very 90s sitcom dad. That is true. It's like I love asymmetry. I feel like asymmetry is very queer. But yeah, it is. It's like 90s dad, which it's like a 90s dad paying homage to like a 70s dad. You know what I mean? With like the color scheme. I need me a good quality fan. I know this is a pretty robust fan. So that I can actually do like the queer applause without it immediately disintegrating. You see the vision? Yeah, that's what at least how I interpret it. Yeah, asymmetry I feel like is just inherently queer coded. It's like, oh, something that is going against what is normally expected. All right. The strength I gained was also due to my encounter with women in Nigeria. WIN, the country's first feminist organization, which enabled me to better understand the struggles that Nigerian women have been making to defend their resources and to refuse the new model of patriarchy imposed on them, now promoted by the World Bank. And how often these new forms of oppression are often sold as like, oh, this is what has always existed. Or like, what, you don't realize? Like, this is what's normal? Where there is this large-scale societal gaslighting to be like, well, this is how things always have been and always will be. Also, a reinterpretation of history and adjustment of schooling, conditioning for people. Not enough people hate the World Bank. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, fuck the IMF. Exactly. Yeah, where it's like, as we were talking about private property and like who is owning what, who is controlling all of these systems, who is wanting to provide legitimacy to oppressive systems, that it's like, it's not an accident that we have the 1%, the ruling class, the people who have heritage in being part of these histories of non-consensual domination, like kings and queens and rulers, like as the ruling class, that it really is something that people are born into. Like all of the bullshit that is sold to us, like bootstraps bullshit, and like, oh, you can like you can become a billionaire in this easy way. That's like, no, that's something you're born into. By the end of 1986, the debt crisis reached the academic institutions, and no longer able to support myself, I left Nigeria in body if not in spirit. But the thought of the attacks launched on the Nigerian people never left me. Thus, the desire to restudy the transition to capitalism, in quotes, has been with me since my return. I had read the Nigerian events through the prism of 16th century Europe. In the United States, it was the Nigerian proletariat that brought me back to the struggles over the commons and the capitalist disciplining of women, in and out of Europe. Upon my return, I also began to teach in an interdisciplinary program for undergraduates where I confronted a different type of, quote, enclosure, close quote. The enclosure of knowledge, that is, the increasing loss among the new generations of the historical sense of our common past, and this is coerced through all of these systems. Your public service. Die a death, the World Bank and IMF isn't freedom. The kleptocracy orchestrate and subjugate the corporate state that isn't freedom. Wow. Incredible. Is this Loki just continually creating profound art and commentary? This is why in Caliban and the Witch I reconstruct the anti-feudal struggles of the Middle Ages and the struggles by which the European proletariat resisted the advent of capitalism. My goal in doing so is not only to make available to non-specialists the evidence on which my analysis relies, but to make available to non-specialists the evidence on which my analysis... Wait, I just read that. Repeat the line. But to revive among younger generations the memory of a long history of resistance that today is in danger of being erased. Saving this historical memory is crucial if we are to find an alternative to capitalism, for this possibility will depend on our capacity to hear the voices of those who have walked similar paths. Yeah, who is able to dictate what history is, who is part of history, who belongs in history, who belongs in the present moment. It cannot be separated from political agendas that are colonial in nature. Yeah, I have a lot of Loki's lyrics committed to memory somehow. The hallmark of a good writer. I mean, truly, like, such an incredible writer, performer, artist, all of these things. And I'm impressed with your memory recall as well. It's like I've prided myself in the past of like being able to remember lyrics to things, but I think the older I get, the more I've consumed substances that I have like a harder time like pulling things from my memory bank just like right off the bat, but you know, I'm impressed with that. Introduction. So we completed the preface. Now on to the introduction. Since Marx, studying the genesis of capitalism has been an obligatory step for activists and scholars convinced that the first task on humanity's agenda is the construction of an alternative to capitalist society. Not surprisingly, I mean, it's not necessarily for every person, or how they are able to start deconstructing colonialism or capitalism, but it often is an important step for many. I've been baked as fuck like 70% of the time for the past few years. I don't know, my memory still functions. I mean, that's wonderful. I love that. I love that for you. The fact that you are still able to do that, especially with like lengthy lyrics as well, is very impressive. Not surprisingly, every new revolutionary movement has returned to the transition to capitalism, bringing it to bringing to it the perspectives of the new social subjects and uncovering new grounds of exploitation and resistance. This volume is conceived within this tradition, but two considerations in particular have motivated this work. First, there has been the desire to rethink the development of capitalism from a feminist viewpoint, while at the same time avoiding the limits of a, quote, women's history, close quote, separated from that of the male part of the working class. The title, Caliban the Witch, inspired by Shakespeare's The Tempest, reflects this effort. In my interpretation, however, Caliban represents not only the anti-colonial rebel whose struggle still resonates in contemporary Caribbean literature, but is a symbol for the world proletariat, and more specifically for the proletarian body as a terrain and instrument of resistance to the logic of capitalism, or non-logic of capitalism. Most important, the figure of the witch, who in The Tempest is confined to a remote background, in this volume is placed at the center stage as the embodiment of a world of female subjects that capitalism had to destroy: the heretic, the healer, the disobedient wife, the woman who dared to live alone, the Obeha woman who poisoned the master's food and inspired the slaves to revolt, the queer people, femme people, trans people, the people without children, not buying into this reproduction of value, of that is the only value that people have. I need to do my homework on emu music for the club. Oh yeah! I'm very excited for you to go and hear about your experience if you are interested in sharing. Shakespeare reference! Ooh! Look at all of the connections. Ha 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 ha. Okay, continuing. The second motivation behind this volume has been the worldwide return, with the new global expansion of capitalist relations, of a set of phenomena usually associated with the genesis of capitalism. Among them are a new round of, quote, enclosures, close quote, that have been expropriated millions of agricultural producers from their land, and the mass pauperization and criminalization of workers through a policy of mass incarceration, recalling the, quote, great confinement, close quote, described by Michel Foucault in his study of history of madness. We have also witnessed the worldwide development of new diasporic movements accompanied by the persecution of migrant workers against, again, reminiscent of the bloody laws, in quotes, that were introduced in the 16th and 17th century Europe to make vagabonds, in quotes, available for local exploitation. And also how, like, vagabonds, people who are, who are migrants, this also very much includes and erases people who are Roma, people who have been expelled from many types of lands, and how the concept of using people for labor and for their bodies, exploiting them in every way possible, and then also erasing them is just part of the colonial playbook, like how Roma people have often had, like, many people who have been oppressed, their source of income or way of life be completely eradicated, like how in many places in Europe it was illegal for Roma people to own horses, and this was the main way of life of what it even meant to be Roma to begin with. And out of necessity, too, by the way, of not being transient intentionally, of Roma people being discriminated against and being kicked out of the Indian subcontinent in very violent ways, and then also being forced into being transient through Europe and other parts of the world. Gotta trace the dragon. Most important for this book has been the intensification of violence against women, including in some countries, South Africa and Brazil, the return of witch hunting. Why, after 500 years of capital's rule at the beginning of the third millennium, are workers on a mass scale still defined as paupers, witches, and outlaws? Yeah, who is defined as criminals? Who is defined as being in the in-group and not? Who is put into these categories through policy? I had to explain to someone the other day that the G slur for Roma and Irish traveler people was a slur. It still is really common. It still is very, very common. And also just like a complete misunderstanding of what Roma identity is, like how diverse this experience is to begin with. It's wild that people are just named that sometimes. Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, this is your name. Like, Rose Blanchard, how like her mom, or she experienced like Munchausen's by proxy from her mom, and then she ended up killing her mom. Yeah, it's a very common thing that is said, which also just goes to show of like the invisibilization. What a cursed last name too. I know. I know. Yeah, and like how she got out of like prison recently and was like going on like a celebrity tour, that it was just like we could have a conversation about like how do we find justice for abusers, and what does that mean in an unjust system where people are conditioned to be like callous and like exhibit a lot of like narcissistic personality disorder, like behaviors of like if they're raised by someone who is such that it's also like, okay, so now you are just like making tons of money off of all of this, so like it is flattening a lot of the conversation we could be having that would be important for situations like this. Then you got to go down the rabbit hole of explaining the concept of exonyms, yep, and their historical use. Exactly. Yeah, of people even using the G slur because they're thinking that Roma people are from Egypt when actually they're from the Indian subcontinent, and how like so much of like language, there is such a crossover with languages that are derived from Sanskrit, and how like there can still be some conversations had between all of these various languages and that originate from the Indian subcontinent. In the suppressed genocides and oppression of those groups while having that word thrown at them. Yep, exactly. Exactly, of how Roma people are often left out of histories of genocide, especially in talking about the genocides that were committed by the Third Reich, and how there are so many people that were killed in that time period that are not talked about, like Black immigrants being some of the first people that were killed and put in concentration camps as well. Yeah, people like queer people, trans people, people who are Jesuit, Roma people. Maybe I'm built different, but I'm capable of accepting that a word is a slur without a history lesson. I know that it's like, it shouldn't have to take that of like, this is why it's bad and this is, but yeah, of like, where people then get in their feelings for being called out for certain things, and then it's like, okay, so now we have to like cater to your own sense of fragility that is just exhausting, and an example of the whole situation to begin with of like you being centered constantly, or like whoever is saying it when they're in their feelings. Then you have the people reclaiming it, like Tyson Fury calling himself the G King when he isn't even part of the group. It was most prevalently used against, he's Irish traveler. Yeah, and also separating that as well of Irish travelers and people who are Roma, of like, it hasn't helped as well that like Peaky Blinders, that show of like, there is this constant like monolithization that happens of like, oh yeah, everyone is the same. People who are nomadic in nature, who have been forced to be nomadic in certain situations, that it's like there is a very big difference in culture, and especially with racialization. It doesn't mean that people don't experience harm, but that there are also hierarchies within this. Of like, when we were reading Wuthering Heights for literature story time, like this is something we had to like talk about again and again, of how Heathcliff is a person of color and is spoken about, is written about in highly racialized terms, that he was most likely Roma or Black, and how and many people think that like, oh, he may have been Irish, but like Irish people were not described in quite as like colorized terms as what Heathcliff is. So like having conversations with people about that, of like in like my YouTube comments as well, of like people going in and being like, you can't, like, I can imagine Heathcliff how I want. That's like, okay, you can do that, but like that means it's a very limited version that is not acknowledging history, and you don't understand the text. But like you can do that. Of people just being like, well, don't challenge like how I view this. It's like, it's just exhausting, and why like, yeah, it sometimes is not even worth engaging. So then it's an uphill battle of, well, they call themselves that, fucking dumbass right-wingers. Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, who is allowed to reclaim language and why? It's like the people where they have been hurt by the term to begin with, you know? Or it's like there are people who are like, well, if I've been called a slur and I'm not part of this population, then I can use this slur. It's like, it doesn't work that way. Like if you are part of the population where it is like systematized, the oppression, and that these slurs are used to justify this systemized violence that you experience, and like in society at large, how people experience this socially, then we can have a reclaiming of language. But it's like people are not able to grasp this most of the time, or many people are not. Wish more people took learning new words and ways of talking as a fun challenge. I know, of like, why is it that like language has to be so confining? It was used against Irish travelers too, but in terms of its origins, it doesn't hold quite the same weight. Yes, exactly. Where, once again, it is used as a way to create a monolith out of people, where it's like Irish people and Irish travelers specifically would experience racialization. And how like we are seeing that in Macbeth with like this othering of the witches, of Scottish people experiencing racialization, but how there is this element as well of colorism that is embedded in anti-Black global sentiment, and wanting to have proximity to whiteness that also cannot be separated, where it's like you can have very different cultural, ethnic contexts, and then people like not understanding the difference between like ethnicity and all of these things. And yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and it takes a lot of like what you were saying, Zoop, like you would hope and that people want to engage in curiosity and humility, but this is often a lot for many kinds of people. But why it's important to even be talking about it to begin with, because still, like as you mentioned, Linton, of like using the G slur, like people still use this with abandon, like it's used all the time. And how yeah, there's this element of like, okay, choosing our battles, which ones are even worth engaging in. Is someone engaging in a good faith conversation, or hopefully it would be a conversation or interaction? And that it's like some people are not even willing to have that kind of discussion, and that people are not really interested in having their minds be changed most of the time, that it has to be like a very internal thing. Then also dealing with the concept of like, well, if people were exposed to more information, then maybe that would help some of that internal process. and people don't have access to a lot of information or education because of all of the like school systems and algorithms controlling like what we see and learn. So like just choosing our battles can be a hard thing to understand, engage with, and also like knowing when to disengage with people at all. Yeah, the death of nuance. All right. It is with these questions in mind that in this work I've revisited the transition, quotes, from feudalism to capitalism from the viewpoint of women, the body, and primitive accumulation. Each of these concepts refers to a conceptual framework that is a reference point for this work: the feminist, the Marxist, and the Foucauldian. Thus, I will begin my introduction with some observations on the relation of my analysis to these different perspectives. I'm just getting a drink. Primitive accumulation is the term that Marx uses in Capital, Volume 1, meaning Das Kapital, to characterize the historical process upon which the development of capitalist relations was premised. It is a useful term, for it provides a common denominator through which we can conceptualize the changes that the advent of capitalism produced in economic and social relations. But its importance lies above all in the fact that, quote, primitive accumulation, close quote, is treated by Marx as a foundational process, revealing the structural conditions for the existence of capitalist society. This enables us to read the past as something which survives into the present, a consideration which is essential to my usage of the term in this work. However, my analysis departs from Marx's in two ways. Whereas Marx examines primitive accumulation from the viewpoint of the waged male proletariat and the development of commodity production, I examine it from the viewpoint of the changes it introduced in the social position of women and the production of labor power. Thus, my description of primitive accumulation includes a set of historical phenomena that are absent in Marx and yet have been extremely important for capitalist accumulation. So, like a little bit ago, we were reading the Communist Manifesto for Literature Storytime, or the Manifesto of the Communist Party, the official name. And this is something that I had mentioned of, say, like there are various feminist interpretations that either expand on some things that he was talking about or repudiate some of the things that he was talking about with labor power and women, and also how this is expanded on even more when we are getting into queer theory and queer thought and decolonial thought, where there are intersections of marginalization and intersections of criticism. Hello, Spongy. Welcome. Some light reading for purely entertainment purposes. Exactly. Yeah. We're engaging in some light fare just for fun. Ha 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 ha. Hi, howdy. Welcome. Glad to have you. How are things with you? I know. We engage in very lighthearted discourse here. I mean, at times, but, you know. They include, one, or I guess I'm just going to say one, the development of a new sexual division of labor subjugating women's labor and women's reproductive function to the reproduction of the workforce. 2, the construction of a new patriarchal order based upon the exclusion of women from waged work in their subordination to men. 3, the mechanization of the proletarian body and its transformation, in the case of women, into a machine for the production of new workers. So again, as we're having a more gender-expansive interpretation of not just women, but anyone with a uterus, and also how femme people are associated within this binary of being male and female, and how there is sexism that exists for people who exhibit femme traits as well. And how this also is not taking into consideration transness as well, and what it means to be a trans woman within this capitalist system. I'm well, just got home from work and I'm resty now. Oh, I'm glad you're able to rest, have a little bit of rest. I hope your day was all right. And I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. Most important, I have placed at the center of my analysis of primitive accumulation the witch hunts of the 16th and 17th centuries, arguing that the persecution of witches in Europe as in the New World was as important as colonization, and the expropriation of the European peasantry from its land were for the development of capitalism. Yes. My analysis also departs from Marx's in its evaluation of the legacy and function of primitive accumulation. Though Marx was acutely aware of the murderous character of capitalist development, its history, he declared, quote, is written in the annals of humanity in characters of fire and blood, close quote. Apparently that's my Marx voice. There can be no doubt that he was viewed as that he viewed it as a necessary step in the process of human liberation. Oh, we on the witches again. We keep returning back to witches. Indeed, we're on the witches again. Especially as we just read a scene yesterday with the witches, the whole like classic like double toil and trouble, and how they are not beholden to this hierarchical idea of kings, of patriarchy, where they're like telling Macbeth to shut up and listen in many ways, and I love that. And Zoop brought this up, Caliban and the Witch, which is something that we talk about from time to time, and something that I've read excerpts of, but have not read all the way through. And I'm like, well, this is where I should engage in continuing my education. So this is me going through something that I was reading yesterday, because I'm starting to read it all the way through. Shut up, you little Danish boy. With his face stuffed into angles. Ah, I love that. He believed that it disposed of small-scale property, and that it increased to a degree, parentheses, to a degree unmatched by any other economic system, that's my parentheses voice, end parentheses, the productive capacity of labor, thus creating the material conditions for the liberation of humanity from scarcity and necessity. He also assumed that the violence that had presided over the earliest phases of capitalist expansion would recede with the maturing of capitalist relations when the exploitation, I thought I was repeating the line, when the exploitation and disciplining of labor would be accomplished mostly through the workings of economic laws. So yeah, this is where we are addressing how there are types of oppression that exist beyond even capitalist oppression, or how getting rid of capitalism to begin with, or like having something to resist capitalist oppression, like with unionizing in general, like how that can help with diminishing some of that power imbalance, but especially as we talk about unions being co-opted by the ruling class, by people who are controlled opposition, that there is a necessary path in decolonizing, that this is very important in actually addressing more of these forms of oppression that still are perpetuated through capitalism, but why we must also have a decolonizing lens and practice to organizing in general. In this, he was deeply mistaken. A return to the most violent aspects of primitive accumulation has accompanied every phase of capitalist globalization, including the present one, demonstrating that the continuous expulsion of farmers from land, war, and plunder on a world scale, and the degradation of women are necessary conditions for the existence of capitalism in all times. Hello, Rune Surge. Welcome. Glad to have you. We are reading the introduction of Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici. We're also reading Macbeth, where we are clearly talking about witches and how if we are engaging in a decolonizing lens of Macbeth, we also need to address who is categorized historically as witches and how they challenge these power structures, especially in colonial cis-heteropatriarchy. Cheers. I just implanted the subdermal chip I bought. I don't know what that means, but I hope that's a good thing for you. I should add that Marx could never have presumed that capitalism paves the way to human liberation had he looked at its history from the viewpoint of women. For this history shows that, even when men achieved a certain degree of formal freedom, women were always treated as socially inferior beings and were exploited in ways similar to slavery. But also, like, there is institutional misogyny and oppression, but also how this is not the same thing as chattel slavery. Hello, Dina. Welcome. How are things with you? Good to see you. It's basically a small chip you put under your skin to unlock whatever you connect to. For example, for me, it's my phone and laptop. That's real? Does that not scare you? I mean, if that works for you. That would not be for me, but if you like that. I'm good. Hope you're doing well. Oh, glad to hear you're doing well. Everyone, also I should say, everyone should go follow and subscribe to Dina and Zoop. Wonderful streamers, non-binary streamers that are doing really great work. I mean, now the only way to get into my phone and laptop is through my hand, so it feels a lot safer this way. Well, I guess there is that. But also how that can be used by and has been used by law enforcement in ways to like force people to like give up information instead of like passwords for things. Law enforcement, at least in the US, like does need a warrant for that. So just calling that out. But if that works for you. Sorry for not watching. Been with comrades all day. You're okay. And, you know, there's no obligation there. But I'm glad you've been able to be with comrades. That's amazing. I love that. But welcome. Glad to have you. Women, in quotes, then in the context of this volume signifies not just a hidden history that needs to be made visible, but a particular form of exploitation, and therefore a unique perspective from which to reconsider the history of capitalist relations. This project is not new. From the beginning of the feminist movement, women have revisited the, quote, transition to capitalism, close quote, again, the most cursed transition, even though they have not always recognized it. For a while, the main framework that shaped women's history was a chronological one. The most common designation feminist historians have used to describe the transition period has been, quote, early modern Europe, close quote, which, depending on the author, could designate the 13th or the 17th century. As long as you keep it a secret, it's pretty secure. In crypto, so they shouldn't know. Okay. Yeah, just make sure you're being safe. In the 1980s, however, a number of works appeared that took a more critical approach. Among them were Joan Kelly's essays on the Renaissance and the Querelle des Femmes, Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature, in 1980, Leopoldina Fortunati's L'arcano de la Riproduzione, in 1981, now available in English, Fortunati 1995, Mary Weisner's Working Women in Renaissance Germany in 1986, and Maria Mies's Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, 1986. To these works, we must add the many monographs that over the last 2 decades have reconstructed women's presence in the rural and urban economies of medieval and early modern Europe, and the vast literature of documentary work that has been produced on the witch hunt and the lives of women in pre-colonial America and the Caribbean islands. Among the latter, I want to remember in particular Irene Silverblatt's The Moon, the Sun, and the Witches in 1987, the first account on the witch hunt in colonial Peru, and Hilary Beckel's Natural Rebels, A Social History of Barbados in 1995, which, together with Barbara Bush's Slave Women in Caribbean Society in 1650 to 1838 in 1990, is one of the major texts on the history of enslaved women in the Caribbean plantations. What this scholarly production has confirmed is that to reconstruct the history of women, or to look at history from a feminist viewpoint, means to redefine in fundamental ways the accepted historical categories and to make visible hidden structures of domination and exploitation. Thus, Kelly's essay, Did Women Have a Renaissance? In 1984, undermined the classical historical periodization that celebrates the Renaissance as an outstanding example of cultural achievement. Yeah, of like who was part of this Renaissance, who was included in it, and most importantly, like who was profiting from this. Carolyn Merchant's The Death of Nature challenged the belief in the socially progressive character of the scientific revolution, arguing that the advent of scientific rationalism produced a cultural shift from an organic to a mechanical paradigm that legitimized the exploitation of women and nature. Yeah, especially when, like, who is not part of these revolutions? Especially important has been Maria Mies's Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale, now a classic work that re-examines capitalist accumulation from a non-Eurocentric viewpoint. Love that. Connecting the destiny of women in Europe to that of Europe's colonial subjects and providing a new understanding of women's place in capitalism and the globalization process. Caliban and the Witch builds upon these works, as on the studies contained within Il Grande Calibano, a work I discuss in the preface, which we read just a little bit ago. However, its historical scope is broader, as the book connects the development of capitalism on one side to the social struggles and the reproduction crisis of the late feudal period, and on the other to what Marx defines as the, quote, formation of the proletariat, close quote. In this process, the book addresses a number of historical and methodological questions that have been at the center of the debate on women's history and feminist theory. The most important historical question addressed by the book is how to account for the execution of hundreds of thousands of, quote, witches, close quote, at the beginning of the modern era, and how to explain why the rise of capitalism was coeval. Coeval? I remember reading this word, but maybe I just glanced over it. Having the same age or date of origin, meaning contemporary.
Coeval.
Yeah, I think I just glossed over that. How to explain why the rise of capitalism was coeval with a war against women. Feminist scholars have developed a framework that throws much light on this question. It is generally agreed that the witch hunt aimed at destroying the control that women had exercised over their reproductive function, again talking about women who are childless or child-free as like spinsters, as witches in all of these stories and like legends being viewed as like eating children as such. That it's like, oh, they have to be evil if they don't have children. Oh no. And served to pave the way for the development of a more oppressive patriarchal regime. It is also argued that the witch hunt was rooted in the social transformations that accompanied the rise of capitalism. But the specific historical circumstances under which the persecution of witches was unleashed, and the reason why the rise of capitalism demanded a genocidal attack on women, have not been investigated. This is the task I take on in Caliban and the Witch, as I begin to analyze the witch hunt in the context of the demographic and economic crisis of the 16th and 17th centuries, and the land and labor policies of the mercantilist era. My work here is only a sketch of the research that would be necessary to clarify the connections I have mentioned, and especially the relation between the witch hunt and the contemporary development of a new sexual division of labor, confining women to reproductive work. It is sufficient, however, to demonstrate that the persecution of witches, like the slave trade and the enclosures, was a central aspect of the accumulation and formation of the modern proletariat in Europe as well as in the, quote, New World, close quote. There are other ways in which Caliban and the Witch speaks to women's history and feminist theory, women's history in quotes. First, it confirms that the, quote, transition to capitalism, close quote, is a test case for feminist theory as the redefinition of productive and reproductive tasks and male-female relations that we find in this period, so in a binary, both realized with the maximum of violence and state intervention, leave no doubt concerning the constructed character of sexual roles in capitalist society. The analysis I propose also allows us to transcend the dichotomy between gender and class, both in quotes. If it is true that in capitalist society, sexual identity became the carrier of specific work functions, then gender should not be considered a purely cultural reality, but should be treated as a specification of class relations, yes. And also, like, as we are talking about queer theory as well, of how anyone that is falling outside of this gender binary or is able to transcend a gender binary through any form of transness, that it is threatening to the system as a whole, and how this is systematized within policy and is classified through actual class. From this viewpoint, the debates that have been taken place among postmodern feminists concerning the need to dispose of women, quote, as a category of analysis and define feminism purely in oppositional terms have been misguided. To rephrase the point I already made, if, quote, femininity, close quote, has been constituted in capitalist society as a work function, masking the production of the workforce under the cover of a biological destiny, then, quote, women's history, close quote, is, also in quotes, class history. And the question that has to be asked is whether the sexual division of labor that has produced that particular concept has been transcended. If the answer is a negative one, parentheses, as it must be when we consider the present organization of reproductive labor, end parentheses, then, quote, women, close quote, is a legitimate category of analysis, and the activities associated with, quote, reproduction, close quote, remain a crucial ground of struggle for women, as they were for the feminist movement of the 1970s, which on the basis connected itself with the history of witches. So this is also talking about the systemization of gender roles and what is viewed as gender to begin with, that this is incredibly political, that there are policies and systems that are created and used to continue these types of divides in order to uphold these hierarchical structures. A further question addressed by Caliban and the Witch is raised by the contrasting perspectives offered by the feminist and Foucauldian analyses of the body in their applications to an understanding of the history of capitalist development. Yeah, so talking about the body of, like, relating this to the previous paragraph of legislating who is considered what gender, especially when it comes to women and bodies and what people can do with their bodies, that this can't be separated from the commodification of bodies and reproductive value, and also policing, quite literally, of people and who is considered what gender, if people are even allowed to have any sort of expansive identity outside of this gender binary because it is enforced. From the beginning of the women's movement, feminist activists and theorists have seen the concept of the, quote, body, close quote, as key to an understanding of the roots of male dominance and the construction of female social identity. Across ideological differences, the feminists have realized that a hierarchical ranking of human faculties and the identification of women with a degraded conception of corporeal reality has been instrumental, historically, to the consolidation of patriarchal power and the male exploitation of female labor. Thus, analyses of sexuality, procreation, and mothering have been at the center of feminist theory and women's history. In particular, feminists have uncovered and denounced the strategies and the violence by means of which male-centered systems of exploitation have attempted to discipline and appropriate the female body, demonstrating that women's bodies have been the main targets, the privileged sites for the deployment of power techniques and power relations. Indeed, the many feminist studies which have been produced since the early 1970s on the policing of women's reproductive function, I guess I could have just kept reading and it would have addressed this more. The effects on women of rape, battering, and the imposition upon them of beauty as a condition for social acceptability are a monumental contribution to the discourse on the body in our times, falsifying the perception common among academics, which attributes its discovery to Michel Foucault. Yeah, like him being attributed all of this, like, supposedly, like, feminist thought. But, you know, it's being deconstructed here. Hi, Bonk. Hi. I don't know if you could hear Juniper. Come here. She's exploring. We'll see if she graces us with her presence. Hi. Oh, there she is. And also, this mention of beauty as a condition for social acceptability, that this is a form of commodification and colonization, of having proximity to whiteness, these Eurocentric beauty standards of who is considered beautiful and not, and how it is necessary to be engaging in an intersectional lens where people are experiencing multiple forms of marginalization of what is considered acceptable, what is considered beautiful, and how this is used as a way to control people and further oppress. Starting from an analysis of, in quotes, body politics, feminists have not only revolutionized the contemporary philosophical and political discourse, but they have also begun to revalorize. Oh, I guess that's erased in the print a little bit. Revalorize the body. This has been a necessary step both to counter the negativity attached to the identification of femininity with corporeality and to create a more holistic vision of what it means to be a human being. This valorization, imagine that, of just being like, wow, we're all humans, and that we all have bodies, and that they are not greater than one another or less than. This valorization has taken various forms, ranging from the quest for non-dualistic forms of knowledge to the attempt, in parentheses, with feminists who view sexual difference as a positive value, in parentheses, to develop a new type of language and, quote, rethink the corporeal roots of human intelligence, close quote. Yeah, especially as we are talking about intelligence, of who is viewed as being accepted within intelligence, that this can be incredibly ableist and classist. All of these intersections go into who is viewed as intelligent, you know, with race and queerness as well. As Rosie Braidotti has pointed out, the body that is reclaimed is never to be understood as a biological given. Nevertheless, such slogans as, in quotes, repossessing the body or speaking the body have been criticized by post-structuralist Foucauldian theorists who reject as illusory any call for instinctual liberation. In turn, feminists have accused Foucault's discourse on sexuality of being oblivious to sexual differentiation, while at the same time appropriating many of the insights developed by the feminist movement. This criticism is quite appropriate. Yeah, I would say so. I met, like, this dude that's, like, trying to talk about gender in a way. It's like, okay, we don't need to, if you don't have this, like, personal experience of what it means to grow up, like, conditioned female, to exhibit female traits, to be femme in any way that is like to identify with being female, that is like, okay, we don't need to hear what you have to say. Moreover, Foucault is so intrigued with the productive character of the power techniques by which the body has been invested that his analysis practically rules out any critique of power relations. The nearly apologetic quality of Foucault's theory of the body is accentuated by the fact that it views the body as constituted by purely discursive practices and is more interested in describing how power is deployed than identifying its source of who has power. Thus, the power by which the body is produced appears as a self-subsistent, metaphysical entity, ubiquitous, disconnected from social and economic relations, and as mysterious in its permutations as a godly prime mover. Can analysis of the transition to capitalism and primitive accumulation help us to go beyond these alternatives? I believe it can. With regard to the feminist approach, our first step should be to document the social and historic conditions under which the body has become a central element into the defining sphere of activity for the constitution of femininity. Along these lines, Caliban and the Witch shows that the body has been for women in capitalist society what the factory has been for male-waged workers, the primary ground for their exploitation and resistance, as the female body has been appropriated by the state and men and forced to function as a means for the reproduction and accumulation of labor. But once again, like, continuing to have a like decolonized like queer lens with this, which like she does address from time to time, but like working within a binary of anyone who exists outside of this binary, of that is another form of marginalization that people experience, of challenging the system in this way. Thus, the importance which the body in all its aspects, maternity, childbirth, sexuality, has acquired in feminist theory and women's history has not been misplaced. Caliban and the Witch also confirms the feminist insight which refuses to identify the body with the sphere of the private and, in this vein, speaks of, quote, body politics, close quote. Further, it explains how the body can be for women both a source of identity and at the same time a prison, and why it is so important for feminists and at the same time so problematic to valorize it. And this also goes for anybody whose bodies are being regulated in any way by these oppressive systems, that your body can be a form of identity, liberation, euphoria, but also a prison when you are being controlled and oppressed. As for Foucault's theory, the history of primitive accumulation offers many counterexamples to it, proving that it can be defended only at the price of outstanding historical omissions. The most obvious is the omission of the witch hunt and the discourse of demonology. Demonology. This is the book that was written by King James, the ruler that Shakespeare was appealing to justify his colonial expansion. In his analysis of the disciplining of the body, undoubtedly they would have inspired different conclusions had they been included, for both demonstrate the repressive character of the power that was unleashed against women, and the implausibility of the complicity and role reversal that Foucault imagines to exist between victims and their persecutors in his description of the dynamic of micropowers. Hi, bud. A study of the witch hunt also challenges Foucault's theory concerning the development of biopower, stripping it to the mystery by which Foucault surrounds the emergence of this regime. Foucault registers the shift, presumably in 18th century Europe, from a type of power built on the right to kill to a different one exercised through the administration and promotion of life forces, such as population growth. How often this occurs with colonial, supremacist regimes and them being concerned about population growth, of who is viewed as wanting to be part of the population growth to begin with, of in-groups, people who are benefiting from these hierarchies, and also that it is about maintaining power over people who are able to reproduce as well. And then people who are challenging these ideas of gender. But he offers no clues as to its motivations. Yet, if we place this shift in the context of the rise of capitalism, the puzzle vanishes, for the promotion of life forces turns out to be nothing more than the result of a new concern with the accumulation and reproduction of labor power. We can also see that the promotion of population growth by the state can go hand in hand with a massive destruction of life, yes. For in many historical circumstances, witness the history of the slave trade, one is a condition for the other, yes. Indeed, in a system where life is subordinated to the production of profit, the accumulation of labor power can only be achieved with the maximum of violence, so that, in Maria Mies's words, violence itself becomes the most productive force. In conclusion, what Foucault would have learned had he studied the witch hunt rather than focusing on the pastoral confession in his history of sexuality is that such history cannot be written from the viewpoint of a universal abstract asexual subject. So in this manner, it's talking about not having any sort of sexuality, not in terms of like identity or like sexual attraction. Further, he would have recognized that torture and death can be placed at the service of life, or better, at the service of the production of labor power, since the goal of capitalist society is to transform life into the capacity to work and, quote, dead labor, close quote. We're going to be talking about necropolitics, more about necropolitics tomorrow. From this viewpoint, primitive accumulation has been a universal process in every phase of capitalist development. Not accidentally, its original historical exemplar has sedimented strategies that, in different ways, have been relaunched in the face of every major capitalist crisis, serving to cheapen the cost of labor and to hide the exploitation of women and colonial subjects. Yeah, so we're getting more of like a colonial mention there. This is what occurred in the 19th century when the responses to the rise of socialism, the Paris Commune, and the accumulation crisis of 1873 were the scramble for Africa and the simultaneous creation in Europe of the nuclear family centered on the economic dependence of women. Sorry, I lost my spot for a sec. Was it supposed to be commune? I'm gonna look that up real quick. Yeah. It's supposed to be commune. I was like, what's a commune? I think when I was reading this was another that I was just going over, and I was like, in my mind, had it be altered to commune. Yeah, the French Revolutionary government in Paris during this time. Where was I? Scramble for Africa and the simultaneous creation in Europe of the nuclear family. Yeah, traditional families, whatever that means. Where it is justifying patriarchy, where you have a patriarch of a family, centered on the economic dependence of women to men, following the expulsion of women from the waged workplace. This is also what is happening today, as a new global expansion of the labor market is attempting to set back the clock with respect to the anti-colonial struggle and the struggles of other rebel subjects. Students, feminists, blue-collar workers, anyone experiencing marginalization, who in the 1960s and 1970s undermined the sexual and international division of labor. It is not surprising, then, if large-scale violence, although, I mean, she's talking about a specific moment in time, but, you know, it included more than just students, feminists, and blue-collar workers. It is not surprising, then, if large-scale violence and enslavement have been on the agenda, as they were in the period of the transition, with the difference that today the conquistadors are the officers of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, like what you were mentioning, Linton. World Bank and IMF, fuck both of them, who are still preaching the word of a penny to the same populations which the dominant world powers have for centuries robbed and pauperized. So mentioning colonization here, at least in practice. Once again, much of the violence unleashed is directed against women, for in the age of the computer, the conquest of the female body is still a precondition for the accumulation of labor and wealth, as demonstrated by the institutional investment in the development of new reproductive technologies that more than ever reduce women to wombs. Yep. It's like not an accident with all of these laws about restricting abortion access, how women are essentially, and people with uteruses are being viewed as incubators, not human beings, like with the rise of fetal personhood. Also, the, in quotes, feminization of poverty that has accompanied the spread of globalization acquires a new significance when we recall that this was the first effect of the development of capitalism on the lives of women. Indeed, the political lesson that we can learn from Caliban and the Witch is that capitalism, as a social economic system, is necessarily committed to racism and sexism, yes, and other isms as well. For capitalism must justify and mystify the contradictions built into its social relations, the promise of freedom versus the reality of widespread coercion, and the promise of prosperity versus the reality of widespread penury. The denigrating of nature of those it exploits, nature of who is being marginalized based off of arbitrary attributes, women, colonial subjects, the descendants of African slaves, the immigrants displaced by globalization. Yeah, there's some typos here. At the core of capitalization, I was about to be like, what is immigrants? At the core of capitalism, there is not only the symbiotic relation between waged contractual labor and enslavement, but together with it the dialectics of accumulation and destruction of labor power. Hello. For which women have paid the highest cost with their bodies, their work, their lives. It is impossible, therefore, to associate capitalism with any form of liberation or attribute the longevity of the system to its capacity to satisfy human needs. If capitalism has been able to reproduce itself, it is only because of the web of inequalities that it has built into the body of the world proletariat, and because of its capacity to globalize exploitation. This process is still unfolding under our eyes as it has for the last 500 years. The difference is that today, the resistance to it has also achieved global dimension. All right. That is the introduction. All right. Shall we because same, into Macbeth? I mean, the categorizing of people as witches, as we have read, is deeply political, deeply classist, very capitalist, colonial. Oh, it would help if I put the gloves on the right hands. Did I have this on the right hand? I'm struggling. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Dina. Wear your gloves. I appreciate you. Yeah, I need this. Just noticing the redeems felt appropriate. I was inspired with seeing your wear your brace one. I was like, that's smart, because I often forget to wear my gloves. And being an extremely sweaty person, like, this is for the benefit of my books. I don't want to destroy them. I used to joke when I was younger, you know, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, that I was like the saltwater bender because I was so sweaty. Like, that's kind of gross. But also, you know, I'm not alone in this. Many people are sweaty. All right, so in the previous scene, mostly people just redeem it to meme. That one has helped me a few times. Oh, that's good. Then you're like already wearing it and they're like, wear your brace. It's always the kid with the sweaty controller. Oh, that's me. Like, in class, when we would like pass in papers, like, people would be like, people would like handing up your paper to like the front of the row. People would be like, ew, why is this paper wet? Like, please, like, don't say anything. That was me. Or like I did the Nutcracker, like in Ballet West, they're a dance company in Utah where we would have like a lot of like partner dancing that I wouldn't normally be doing like with other kinds of dancing growing up. And there would be, especially like the boys that would be dancing there, they would be like, "Ew, why is your hand so wet?" I'm like, "Shut up." I mean, I wouldn't say that. Other people would be like, "Did you just like wash your hands?" I'm like, "No, stop." I'm like, I'm doing physical activity. But also, it doesn't necessarily even need to have physical activity to be very sweaty. Okay, this scene is a little bit longer. One of the longer scenes we've had. Maybe I will just read half of it, just for what I have time today. But the previous scene that we had was featuring the witches, where they have all of their iconic lines. What are these other kids doing? Rubbing deodorant on their hands? I know. Thanks for the solidarity, Dina. I appreciate it. I mean, maybe. Perhaps. Perchance. Yeah, I'm like, if you're exerting yourself physically, people aren't getting sweaty. I don't know what that life is like, but good for you, I guess. In the previous scene, this is where it featured the witches heavily. Hecate was in it. Macbeth went and found the witches. They knew he was coming. They did all of these spells and potions to prepare for his coming because they were summoning spirits. And he was trying to like order them about, and they were like, "Shut up, just listen." And I love that. So that was cool. But also it was highlighting how they are beyond his control, which is a pretty fierce move, but something that King James would have felt threatened by. It wasn't necessarily, like, on its face is pretty feminist, but not necessarily, like, feminist enough to have Shakespeare be viewed as, like, a rebel or that he was anti-establishment. He certainly was not. He was appealing to King James. So we are leaving that scene, moving into scene 2 of Act 4, where we have Lady Macduff, and she actually has quite a few lines, which, is not always common in Shakespeare's plays. But she, in this scene, is talking about how Macduff, her husband, left because he was afraid and was not wanting to be accused of murder, even though people thought he was, because he was one of the next people in line to be king. And that he was escaping because he was afraid that he was going to be killed. And so Lady Macduff and her son have this conversation where they are talking about him leaving. All right. Enter Macduff's wife, her son, and Ross. Lady Macduff. What had he done to make him fly the land? Ross. You must have patience, madam. Lady Macduff. He had none. His flight was madness. When our actions do not, our fears do make us traitors. Footnote. Even when we have committed no treason, our fear of suspicion makes us behave as though we are guilty. Which is, a very wise thing for her to be saying. So Shakespeare actually allowing her to have thoughts. Imagine that. Ross. You know not whether it was his freedom or his fear. Lady Macduff. Wisdom to leave his wife, to leave his babes, his mansion, and his titles in a place from whence himself does fly. So, a rare instance of actually having some priorities, of saying, like, leaving me and his children, where his titles, that is listed last, like his estates. Normally, like, estates and property ownership is listed first in stuff like this. Again, it doesn't mean it's, like, breaking down these hierarchies, though, because Macduff still has all of these estates that people are generating a lot of labor that he is benefiting from. He loves us not. He wants the natural touch. For the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will flight, her young ones in her nest against the owl. All is the fear, and nothing is love. As little is the wisdom, where the flight so runs against all reason. So she's calling him out. Ross. My dearest coz, meaning like cousin, kinswoman. I pray you school yourself. He's saying control yourself. He's like, don't talk about your husband that way. It's like, okay, shut up, Ross. But for your husband, he is noble, wise, judicious, and best knows the fits of the season. Yeah, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's just a coward. Footnote, the violent convulsions of the present time, what befits the time. I'm saying, like, he knows best. Don't question your husband. I dare not speak much further, but cruel are the times when we are traitors and do not know ourselves, when we hold rumour from what we fear, yet know not what we fear, but float upon a wild and violent sea, each way and none. Footnote, in every direction, and so finally in none. I take my leave of you. Shall not be long, but I'll be here again. Things at the worst will cease, or else climb upward to what they were before. My pretty cousin, blessing upon you. So he's talking to Macduff's son there. My pretty cousin. Like, I don't know if you should be talking about him that way. Lady Macduff. Fathered he is, and yet he's fatherless. Ross. I'm so much a fool. Should I stay longer, it would be my disgrace and your discomfort. I take my leave at once. So footnote, I would disgrace myself and embarrass you by weeping, or perhaps by lingering. So he's like, it would look bad, because we can't be found together when you technically have a husband, but are now single somewhat since he's gone. And not for incest reasons, because they're related, because, you know, the upper class is constantly engaging in that. The ruling class. He exits. Lady Macduff, she's talking to her son now. Sirrah, your father's dead. And what will you do now? How will you live? Macduff's son. As birds do, mother. Lady Macduff. What, with worms and flies? Macduff. With what I get. I mean, so do they. Lady Macduff. Poor bird. Thou'dst never fear the net nor lime, the pitfall nor the gin, meaning the snare. Bird lime, we have a footnote, a sticky substance smeared on twigs to catch small birds. Macduff's son. Why should I, mother? Poor birds they are not set for. My father is not dead, for all your saying. Lady Macduff. Yes, he is dead. How wilt thou do for a father? Son. Nay, how will you do for a husband? Lady Macduff. Why, I can buy me 20 at any market. So, she's like, I can get any man. Which, cool. But also, she's not, like, distributing the wealth of the estates, so. Bourgeois feminism. Son. Then you'll buy him to sell again. Lady Macduff. Thou speakest with all thy wit, and yet, in faith, with wit enough for thee. She's like, you only know so much. Son. Was my father a traitor, mother? Aye, that he was. Son. What is a traitor? Why, one that swears and lies. Footnote, takes an oath and breaks it. Macduff's son. And be all traitors that do so? Lady Macduff. Everyone that does so is a traitor, and must be hanged. So she really is upset. It's like, he should be hanged. Son. And must they all be hanged that swear and lie? Everyone? Who must hang them? Why, the honest men. Or, you know, like the government. So I don't know if that should be equated with being honest. Son, then the liars and swearers are fools, for there are liars and swearers enough to beat the honest men and hang up them. Oh, Rebellion? What? Lady Macduff. Now God help thee, poor monkey. How wilt thou do for a father? Son. If he were dead, you'd weep for him. If you would not, it would a good sign that I should quickly have a new father. Lady Macduff. Poor prattler, how thou talkest. So he's like, you need a husband. Already internalizing patriarchy. She was like, shut up. She's like, you don't know anything. Enter a messenger. Bless you, fair dame, I'm not known. I am not to you known, though in your state of honor I am perfect. Apparently that's their voice, the messenger. Footnote, though I know perfectly well your high rank, an apology for bursting in. Okay, don't apologize. Who cares about rank? I doubt some danger does approach you nearly. If you will take a homely man's advice, I'll not be not found here. Hence with your little ones. To fright you thus methinks I am too savage. To do worse to you were to fell cruelty. So also the word savage cannot be separated from these colonial projects. Who is categorized as a savage? Often this is racialized, colonized, also an element of class. Him being like, oh, like, forgive me, I'm trying to save your life, but this is not proper to be speaking. Sorry, I have a cat hair in my nose. Which is too nigh on your person. Heaven preserve you. I dare abide no longer. Exit messenger. Lady Macduff. Whither should I fly? I've done no harm. But I remember now I am in this earthly world, where to do harm is often laudable. To do good sometime accounted dangerous folly. So she's like, even when you do good sometimes it's folly. Why then, alas, do I put up that womanly defense to say I have done no harm? So it's not like she's a feminist by saying a womanly defense, by saying like, I haven't done any harm. So she's saying naivete is being equated with being womanly. Enter murderers. A murderer. Where's your husband? Lady Macduff. I hope in no place so unsanctified where such as thou mayest find him. A murderer. He's a traitor. Macduff's son. Thou liest, thou shag-haired villain. Okay. That also seems transphobic. Like, okay, just someone with long hair. And it's assumed that the murderer is a man. A murderer stabbing him. Oh, stabbing the son. What, you egg? Young fry of treachery. Meaning young spawn of treachery. Macduff's son. He has killed me, mother. Run away, I pray you. He dies. Exit Macduff's wife, crying, Murder! Followed by murderers with the son's body. So that's bleak. But, you know, under the orders of Macbeth, these murders are committed, which normally it would be like, okay, do we care if the ruling class, they are being taken down, but, you know, we don't want children targeted. But, this is where we continue to see, supposedly, the crimes, well, I guess it is, like, we don't condone the murdering of children, so I know that's a radical thing to be saying, especially these days. But we continue to see these elements of what is considered like criminality stack up against Macbeth. So his guilt is building, his paranoia is building. The more atrocities that he exists in this system, or what is considered atrocities, that he is getting increasingly more violent and paranoid. So, like, it breeds more violence and paranoia the more that he engages in it. And we will see his deterioration as we continue throughout the play. And what he will do, what he's willing to do to protect his position and maintain power. All right. That will be it for me today. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, we'll get into more conversations about necropolitics. And we will be getting into Banned Book Club as well, for those who are interested. Oh, thank you, Dina. Thank you for being here. Okay, so we have read the chapter, or we're finishing the chapter. See, Mother, Mother is very nice. Mother, will you play with Jane? Mother laughs. Laugh, Mother, laugh. And we are going through the whole chapter, so until the next chapter, which is, see, Father, he is big and strong. Father, will you play with Jane? Father is smiling. Smile, Father, smile. So, essentially, pages 110 to 132 in this version. All right. Thank you all for being here. It was wonderful being with you. Is there someone that we could do a raid that is on right now? Let's see. Oh, yes. Steph is on. Chef Steph. You knew exactly what I was about to say, Dina. We're on the same wavelength. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are. And I will see you soon. Go behave yourselves. Okay, bye.